Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode of MarkTech. Maybe at this point I should call it MarkTech Reacts whenever I do this specific type of video. But this is actually almost a continuation of yesterday's video where I've been reacting to just general iPhone 15 Pro reviews by Dave2D, iJustine, Mr. Who's the Boss, The Verge, and I also wanted to do some camera coverage, though the stream yesterday got a little out of hand, so this is why this is happening today, which also happens to nicely coincide with the launch of SuperSaf's iPhone 15 Pro Max versus S23 Ultra comparison. I have not, as far as I understand, it's not the final, decision from him, on which he prefers. There will be an even more detailed breakdown, apparently. However, I do think that this is a very good video. I think this video vindicates me so much, a lot of the predictions that I made, a lot of the assumptions that I had, some stuff that people were telling me I was a fanboy for, and I will also criticize reviewers to a degree in this video based on certain testing methodology. Now this will more apply to the SuperSaf video than the PetaPixel video. If you don't know what PetaPixel is, those are amazing guys. They did the DP review website, and the channel that unfortunately closed down, so this now turned into PetaPixel. I'm very happy they found basically they didn't lose their audience, and I'm definitely a long-time fan. So, and I also do like SuperSaf. I do like the way he makes his comparisons. I think they're pretty detailed. I think he has a decent methodology. There are some problems that I will call out, and in some conclusions I might not always agree with, sometimes in the favor of the iPhone, sometimes in the favor of the Galaxy, but to me I will be mostly neutral. Again, as I've said before, I don't really care about the final camera quality. Once quality is above a certain threshold, the only thing Apple really needed to fix for me this year were some smart HDR stuff, because that was the only thing that I considered subpar to what I would expect from a high-end iPhone. Just briefly make sure that my stream is working fine. So like this, and like this. Good, everything seems to work. Please, as always, let me know if something might be wrong with the audio or the stream might be unstable. Again, I fixed most of tech issues that OBS seems to have with the latest version of macOS Sonoma, but it is definitely still something can always go wrong, right? This is kind of the nature of live television, live streaming, stuff like that. Kulanichizi, I still don't know how to pronounce your name. Thank you for joining us. You're saying there is a detailed A17 review by Geekervan. I've actually seen, not the video, but I've seen some small takes from it. Basically, he basically says that it's a great chip, but it's not quite as efficient as he expected. I don't think that I will be reacting to a foreign language. Granted, English is a foreign language to me kind of as well. It's just the point that reacting to a non-English video with subtitles, well, there's also my face on it. I might wait until we have maybe something from a Nantac as well, or somebody else like that, and then I could see myself reacting to several content pieces in a row. Again, this is not a React channel. It just so happens that I don't have early access to an iPhone, so this is why I'm doing this. Believe me, if I had an iPhone or an Apple Watch early, then you would see me actually doing the testing myself as much as possible for me. So yeah. Also, a big shout out. We added 50 subscribers since yesterday. That's a 20% day-on-day growth. The fuck is wrong with you guys? How awesome are you? A big thank you. Let me just briefly turn on the reactions. because I turned them off yesterday. So I can give you a big heart for this. This really is such an awesome thing that you do for this channel. Again, it is a hobby, but it is a hobby I'm taking more and more seriously because of you, more and more passionately, investing more and more time while I still have it. So I am incredibly humbled by your incredible support. As always, please do all the YouTube jazz, as I call it, and please consider following me on Twitter or supporting me on Patreon, but I will be obviously mentioning all that stuff as well later on. YouTube kind of makes you do it, and I'm seeing the success of that as well. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. I'll be starting with the SuperSaf video, and then we'll be getting to PetaPixel a little bit afterwards.
The SuperSaf style camera comparison between the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It's Saf, you're on SuperSaf TV, and this is the SuperSaf style camera comparison between the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. It's the one you've all been waiting for. We're going to test out all aspects of the cameras, videos, images. We're also going to be testing out the zoom, so stay tuned for that. So we're going to
And there will be a lot of interesting stuff here, and some things where I'll be beating my chest with just how right I was across Twitter and some of my YouTube videos, and some of my generalized statements on previous cameras, because I don't take like camera statements from anybody by face value. My opinion is based on like basically a meta review of several dozen other reviews, and then whatever I have in terms of first-hand experience with whatever piece of hardware already was out there. So yeah, this will be a very positive video for me, and for that also as a start, cheers guys. As always, I'll be muting myself when I drink, but sometimes I might forget it.
to kick off with photos from the primary cameras, and there is a lot to cover. Now, after taking lots and lots of photos, what I did notice is that the iPhone 15 Pro Max does have a better overall dynamic range. You can see here in these
also, just like I'll be sometimes moving my face around because obviously it is covering shit up for me as well. Zooming in for me makes relatively little sense right now, because obviously this is a saved video file that isn't in the highest resolution from the original video. What you can see is this blue, like the iPhone's blue, by the way, is not natural either. But what Samsung is doing is like in a completely different like universe when it comes to color reproduction. We don't see the same plant on the iPhone video, unfortunately, so I cannot compare the greens. I have to say I do like the look of the Samsung, like the way Samsung portrays the building, so it's not like I have a problem with either video. I definitely agree with him that the HDR is better on the iPhone. I don't know if this darkness in the you cannot see my mouse, this is where I'll always try to like mention what I'm talking about. Like I don't know if like the dark nature of like the building facade on the S23 Ultra is natural, or it's actually more grayish rather than black. It looks good in both, so it doesn't really matter that much. What I would say is when you look at like the basically the checkerboard without black and white, it's all gray on the building. It feels like it's a little over sharpened on Samsung's side, while the iPhone maintains like a slightly softer, more like real camera look. Like it's a very small difference. I agree with him that I ever so slightly prefer the iPhone. However, in a picture like this, quite honestly, I'm perfectly fine with a draw. I think this really comes down to preference, and I could not really attack anybody who likes the Samsung image more here.
Examples in the shadow areas, the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
Yeah, this looks way better on the iPhone. You can also, like, it's hard sometimes to tell which one has actually more detail in something like this foreground sign, because it looks like there is like a texture on the Samsung one that isn't on the iPhone. However, that is like basically it being in shadow more aggressively than it is, which is better HDR handling by the iPhone. And when you look at the shadows going into the back, basically throughout the entire place there, I'm absolutely inclined to believe the iPhone is doing this in a more natural way, because I know from my 13 Pro Max that it will struggle with situations like this. Like I've recently taken some pictures in the park, and the shadows were like, they didn't completely kill the detail, at least not on the main camera. It kind of was a mess on the ultra wide, but the shadows were easily twice as dark as they were in real life. So if the iPhone is actually significantly brighter here, knowing Apple's history with shadows, this leads me to believe that this is pretty natural, while this is more like what I would get from my 13 Pro Max. Maybe a little better. Maybe my 13 Pro Max would like make the sky look really bright as well, basically being worse in both shadows and bright highlights, but it's difficult for me to obviously predict that.
Has definitely better maintained those details. The S23 Ultra tends to go for a little bit more of a vibrant, more of a punchy look, and does see.
By the way, this is where this is the first thing where I will be completely anti-reviewers, where this does not represent the end user experience whatsoever. When we are just saying, oh, the Galaxy gives you a more vibrant look. There are modes on the iPhone that change the color science on a fundamental level that is baked into the photo algorithm. It's not a filter. If you choose like cool or warm, and then you can fine tune it, and you can change even like some contrast behavior. This is not a filter. What Google and Apple are doing is actually very advanced in that regard. And I have not seen something like this from Samsung in a way that actually like retains its ability to be edited well and stuff like that. So this idea that Samsung is like more punchy, guess what? You can make the iPhone more punchy without sacrificing anything. So this is one thing where I'm saying this has nothing to do with it being like a pro feature or anything like that. Photographic styles has been available in all iPhones for years, so as a software feature. So this idea to me that like, what was it, an iPhone 13 or an iPhone 12 feature? I don't quite remember, but it's been like this now for a while, and it works extremely well if you prefer something. Like I see a lot of people saying, oh, I do prefer a somewhat cooler tone than the iPhone delivers. Guess what? Go into photographic styles, just make it like 10% cooler, and then you're fine. You get a slightly more pixelish look. But where the iPhone was behind the Pixel, to me, was never about the preference between warm hues and cold tones. It was always about the Pixel handled some HDR stuff better, handled some really like bad shadow situations better. This is when at peak I considered Pixel far above the iPhone in stills photography, while still absolutely sucking ass in videography. But this idea that like, at this point, now that iPhones have solved HDR, now that they have improved color handling across the board, they're offering you so many modes, from like Pro RAW and photos to like ProRes and log file recording on video. It kind of is funny to me to believe that people are still like not even considering like photographic styles and how it corrects something that you might prefer or not prefer, right? If you prefer it on another phone and you want to tune it that way, you can absolutely do it.
To be increasing the contrast, which might be a cause of this. But one new thing that we have on the iPhone is that now by default, it will shoot at 24 megapixels. So you will be getting more resolution at default compared to the S23 Ultra. And it does mean that the images do appear to all.
This is such a big difference, by the way, in HDR. Like, look at just the for one, the amount of detail on the iPhone is still great. The grass on the iPhone, I guarantee you that the grass did not look this way as it does on the S23 Ultra. This is something that I've been seeing since the S3. The Galaxy S3, like this, like yes, Samsung has improved, and yes, Apple actually became a little worse since like the iPhone 5 days, I would say, when it comes to color reproduction, because in order to preserve all the detail and stuff like that, you do end up giving up a little bit of accuracy. I'm fine with that for the most part, but look at, like, nothing is as saturated as here, which, yeah, like the only way where the iPhone probably, well, no, I wanted to say that like the tree shadow is like worse than the iPhone, but it's more zoomed in, so it was more zoomed just in on a shadowy part. When I actually look at the tree, I will see more detail on the iPhone. And then also like 100% zoom. Yeah, okay, yeah, they do also have, like, by default, I believe, slightly different. Are they both 24 millimeters by default? No, I think this is 23 millimeters, right? Because because the 10x zoom on the S24 Ultra is 230 millimeters, and the iPhone's 5x zoom is 120 millimeters. Maybe Samsung is doing some rounding there. But yeah, just look at the difference in HDR handling. Like this shadow on the Samsung, like going on from this police booth, it's like completely dark basically in comparison to everything else. Look at the much softer, like in gaming, this what we would define basically is like a difference between non-ray traced shadows and ray traced shadows, by which I mean that ray traced shadows can actually usually be a little softer because they much more smartly account for the distance from which the light comes, and it also accounts for like if a big object, like the shadow that falls obviously further, right, it will have different properties than the shadow that is right next to the object. So the iPhone basically is doing a much more realistic portrayal, almost in like a rendering kind of sense. Obviously that's a joke in that regard, but the gamers here will understand what I'm saying.
So look sharper. Now I know a lot of you guys are going to be going crazy in the comments saying yes, but the S23 Ultra has a 200 megapixel camera, and that is correct.
It doesn't. It doesn't. The pixels are way too small at 200 megapixel. So you could make the argument that it could be a 50 megapixel camera by aggregating 4 pixels into one. Instead, what it does, it aggregates 9 pixels into one and then outputs 12 megapixels. But at 200 megapixels, you would need such a good light source, and you end up like increasing your processing demands so much that everything about capturing the photo will be so significantly delayed. It will be basically worthless by modern smartphone standards, unless you're doing like stills photography in nature where nothing moves, even the wind is like super like non-intrusive in any way. It's really not how we use modern smartphones, and there will be some criticism later on from me in some regards and what exact scenarios he uses each camera, but for now I very much agree with his core statements here.
15 Pro Max has a 48 megapixel camera. So if we do shoot at these maximum resolutions, you are going to be able to crop in further on the S23 Ultra.
By the way, guys, big shout out to I'm gonna turn on my reactions again. Reactions. Big shout out. We added 4 new subscribers in like the last 5 minutes. That's insane, guys. We have 4 people watching. Please let me know what you're most interested in, what you're enjoying, basically, what you would like to see next. I do love interacting with chat. I know based on the time that I react, sometimes it's like not possible to do it as detailed as I do, but like, come on, like this support is incredible that you're giving me. Let me shout you out if you're a new subscriber or something like that.
Although I wouldn't necessarily say it's sharper, it's just a larger image. Looking around this photo, I would still say that the iPhone 15 Pro Max does hold its own even though it doesn't have a 200 megapixel sensor. Now, the other thing to keep...
Also, like, the colors are just so clearly more natural in the iPhone in this. And the reason why I'm praising this, when you go back to the iPhone 12 and stuff like that, or even especially to the iPhone 11, I would say, which was like the phone that I didn't get because I had the XS. And what was interesting afterwards was that people were praising the iPhone 11 Pro wildly. It had pretty much the same sensor as the XS Max, but then it added an extra zoom camera. It added the ultra wide, and it obviously used the better image signal processor from the A13 chip. It just so happens I never liked the processing on the A11 generation. Like, it was way too warm at that point without a mode to correct that. And the detail was nice, sure. I do think the detail was still overall better than on my XS, but I just so dislike that trade-off that yeah, I just couldn't bring myself to get either that one or the 12 series. By the way, let's say hello to Bella. Bella, you want to say hello as well? She'll just fall asleep right next to me. She always does. She loves listening to my voice. That's the one time she usually doesn't misbehave. Maybe I'll just correct ever so slightly down so you could see a little more of her if she decides to even show anything but her tail.
In mind as well is that the 24 megapixels default on the
Meow.
iPhone, you can take multiple shots with it. It doesn't really take any time to process. Whereas on the S23 Ultra, if you do take an image with the 200 megapixels or even at 50 megapixels, there is a bit of lag and it does take time.
This is not a bit of lag. This is completely unacceptable by modern standards. There is a point for why like smart HDR and similar technologies are still designed to be operating at basically zero shutter lag. The point is that it is a modern smartphone and it's not a DSLR. It's not a mirrorless camera. What it is designed for, like, to capture your shots of your pets, of your pets, of your children as fast as possible, and then once you are in a worse light situation, and quality really would become atrocious without any kind of even more computational help. This is when you get stuff like night mode. It's not designed to always take 4 or 5 seconds to take a photo.
To process. Now, let's move on.
Also, by the way, like, I think he compared a Heath 48 megapixel file, right? Which you can turn on in settings. I don't think that that's a reasonable comparison. I think if you're gonna use like the full sensor resolution, basically you should use Expert RAW on Samsung and you should use Pro RAW on the iPhone.
Low light. When you are in low light on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you will be...
I mean, look at the detail in the grass. I mean, it can always depend on where the focus exactly was, right? For taking the picture. The sky, it's difficult to tell. There's a lot of, like, Samsung's, I would say, is sharper but more grainy, which leads me to believe that this isn't actual detail. This is post-processed over sharpening. And the trees still look better on the... Yeah, so yeah, does look better on the iPhone by far, actually. I didn't even notice it that much while I originally watched the video.
Switch to 12 megapixels. It cannot do 24 megapixels in low light because it needs to let in as much light as possible by combining pixels together to get the most out of the sensor. And on this example, I think both are actually doing really well. On this image, however, I prefer the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
Yeah, this is a scenario where I will wholeheartedly admit my 13 Pro Max would suck at it, and I'm so glad Apple has solved this issue. Smart HDR5 apparently really rocks, so I'm glad that this is here. Looks way better than on the Samsung. I am actually really surprised by, like, the difference in handling with the foreground plants here on the iPhone side. It looked like this warm inviting tone, and it's like completely overblown on the Galaxy. So yeah, I actually didn't expect as much of a difference in something like this. But again, this is in darkness basically, right? This kind of looks almost like a summer day, but when you look at the top, you'll find it was captured in darkness. So night mode has come such a long way on all phones. Like, yeah, the iPhone is better than the Galaxy, but overall, I would say that the iPhone really, all phones are now way better than they used to when like the Pixel announced it, and when Apple brought it to the 11 Pros and stuff like that. So there's a lot going on here.
Got more detail, and it's a sharper image in low light, and this was a very dark situation. Like, I could barely see anything myself. It's quite spooky actually. Now here I prefer the S23 Ultra. If you look at the details on the slabs, they have been better made.
As do I. My question is where exactly the focus was, because it kind of looks like the iPhone focused more on the actual light. Because the structure of the lantern is far better maintained on the iPhone than on the Samsung, and well, the plant looks like shit on both. It's, to me, this kind of photo, I don't know. I would probably try to maybe find an extra kind of light source for it. Hopefully one that isn't the LED flash, but I just don't like this image on either one. But yeah, the tiles are way more detailed on the Samsung.
Maintained compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. However, the light has been slightly blown out. But there was something interesting that I noticed. Whenever I was taking any low light images, the S23 Ultra did take longer to capture the low light image.
This is where I will be extremely critical of SuperSaf and other reviewers. This is basically a rant that is coming up.
Compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. In addition to that, the iPhone 15 Pro Max gives you a bit of a preview in the viewfinder, so you kind of know what to expect. Whereas on the S23 Ultra, you are practically shooting blind because you can't really see much in the viewfinder. It's only when you tap the shutter button.
Yeah, so this is where I'll 100% obliterate him. And this is what I have said during my last video. You can go back. I have said that reviewers don't test night mode properly. They're all like, oh, but automatically the iPhone wants to capture it for 3 seconds and the Samsung wants to capture it for 5 seconds. I'm just listening to the automatic mode. You understand, it's not a difficult thing to like manually slide and like make night mode last a little longer on the iPhone. Where's that attitude coming from? Oh, Samsung only took twice as long to capture this better looking low light photo? Yeah, let me just use this like twice as long captured photo, which by the way will also invalidate some of his upcoming low light scenario, because I would never compare just like 3 seconds versus 5 seconds, or even 3 seconds versus 4 seconds, certainly not 3 seconds versus 6 seconds or something like that, because that is worthless. Why? You can capture an iPhone photo for up to 10 seconds even in regular handheld mode, and you can capture for far longer with a tripod. I really don't understand where that is coming from. Like, why? Also, like, that preview is such a godsend to any of you who have actually tried to capture a photo somewhere where you might not have been actually able to see what you would be capturing in any way, probably because even like your own eyes are not as good as night sight at that point. However, this is a game-changing thing that, yeah, he mentioned, thank you, but the fact that Samsung still hasn't solved it, this is why when people are trying to compare sometimes processors or stuff like that directly, I never really get behind this, because there's so much that any company is doing at any moment to optimize for hyper-specific use cases. Like, Apple could be putting like a dozen extra engineers to improve like instructions per clock by another 5% or something like that. Yeah, sure. Does it really change anything for real-world scenarios? Probably not. What does change it for real world? It's to make an image signal processor that aggregates so much data that it can give you a night sight preview. The same goes for portrait mode preview. For how long did Androids not have portrait mode preview? Like Pixels didn't have it, and then you didn't even know. And now we are in an era where iPhone captures portraits automatically. We are in an era where there's like cinematic mode on iPhone that actually gets improved year by year, and not is like a stagnant feature that is kept in the software stack, and then you hope that a new sensor and a new processor just magically improve it. Again, I'm not saying everybody but Apple is lazy. I have repeatedly said how much I admire what Google has done for like mobile photography. It just so happens that I really don't understand where this mindset is coming from in regards to oh, let us just test automatic mode, right? Because everybody always just uses automatic. Sure, to a degree, but that doesn't mean that you are in any way prevented. Like, I understand not using ProRAW, I understand not using ProRes, I understand not using log files, but this idea that you cannot time match your night mode recording, like that to me is just like crazy pill stuff.
And wait for it to take the photo and process, and then you'll be able to see it. So I would say that in low light, shooting with the iPhone is actually easier. Now in this example, I prefer...
Again, it's easier, but it can be just as like, well, for one, it is easier through the preview, but it's also much more capable than you let it make it look by only using the automatic mode. Like, what was the difference between those pictures? Like, was that what he just showed? In terms of like, it's hard to scroll in OBS, guys, I'm sorry. Yeah, oh yeah, he captured that image on in automatics. Wait, so how long did it take on either one?
Low light, shooting with the iPhone is actually easier. Now in this example, I prefer the iPhone. I think it's a sharper overall image. It's also not blown out the highlights in the windows. And this is...
Okay, he did not show how much the houses took to capture. But like that picture with like the lantern is like such a very clear like difference here. That like, yeah, I really... I don't get it.
Low light image, although I think both are doing good overall.
The iPhone looks way better, and once again, I want to know how long was the night sight thing going for on those pictures. Because if the Samsung actually took as long as the iPhone for this, that's already embarrassing. If it took longer for this result, then it's completely hilarious.
Does give you a brighter image. So I would say in low light, generally the shooting experience and the results, I do prefer the iPhone. Now with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, not only will you be shooting by default at 24 megapixels for regular images, you'll also be shooting at 24 megapixels for portrait images. Now let's take a look here. I think both are doing great overall in terms of edges. Slight difference in colors.
I don't like portrait photos that are this far away. Like at this point, I would try to probably capture it as like a main sensor thing, hoping that it has enough natural depth of field in the background because it's a large sensor, really trying to put the actual person in focus. And then for a real portrait, I would probably capture it using one of the telephoto cameras.
The S23 Ultra in this situation I think is doing better with the blacks, but because the iPhone 15 Pro Max has shot at 24 megapixels versus 12, you do get more detail. And
again, why the different zoom level? This is not how you actually compare detail. Like, I know he wants to show that like, oh, 12 megapixel on an iPhone image is further in than on the Galaxy because it captures at 24. I understand, but the way you do detail comparison is you zoom in on both and then compare those details. This is what Mr. Who's the Boss did really well by showing us a result from one of those new extra lens modes, right, between like 28 and 35 millimeters, and where he showed us that ultimately those modes are not just zooming in on the frame, they're actually using extra algorithms, almost like like DLSS like. It's not, but you know what I mean, right? There, because it is so advanced for this specific target, between like what the actual output resolution is and what the resolution of the sensor is from which you're still recording, once you account for the small crop. This is actual optimization. This idea that you can just say, oh, it's 24 megapixel, therefore it's sharper. I mean, yes, it happens to be sharper with what the iPhone does, but when you later look at some things like the telephoto, like 5x versus 10x, you will find something shocking there, where I was once again 100% right, and this is another rant you can look forward to.
Can crop in further. In addition to that, we have a new feature on the iPhone, and that
again, cropping in further does not matter. Like, how far in are you like, I don't care that this, what he's saying right now, benefits the iPhone. It's just the wrong perspective to have. Like, what matters is the level of detail. I mean, yeah, sometimes you can crop in a little more in the actual Photos app, but you can also like take it into a different Photos app and zoom in there. Like in Pixelmator, you can basically zoom in until it's like pixel to pixel. It's I don't really get that perspective here. Like, just say it's a sharper image.
That is the ability to take regular photos with the depth information so you can turn them into portraits later. This is something that I've been hugely impressed with, and it's something that makes so much sense because you don't always have time to go into portrait mode to take a photo. Sometimes you just want to take a photo. So the iPhone will automatically detect when there is a person in the shot, or maybe a cat or a dog. Or if you want to trigger it yourself, you can just tap on something if it's an object. And if available...
Huge shout out once again to everybody watching. We've added 2 new subscribers. Big heart for all of you there. It's amazing. It's really, I couldn't be more grateful for this. I never expected it to happen this way. We've added now, what, 55 subscribers since yesterday. That's insane.
The iPhone will capture this depth information, which you can then go back into and apply. You can also change the point of focus. So you've got so much flexibility here with the iPhone.
This is a feature that, in my opinion, almost invalidates the competition until they have something similar. I would say it's similar to what night mode was on the Google Pixel. Again, the Google Pixel, in my opinion, really suffered from being a mediocre phone in most regards, except for its camera. If it had launched with a better camera, a more cohesive design language over the first 2-3 generations, really good like launch time where it actually was using the latest processor by the time the processor was actually coming out, and not half a year late and had to compete with the iPhone with a far better processor. With all, and then if we didn't have like Google focus on gimmicks that they then gave up each 1 year later, weird design decisions like the ultra intrusive deep notch on the Google Pixel 3. This is where I have to say that if Google had gotten it right, and by right I mean if they had either made it cheaper with the same great camera, and without, by removing the gimmicks, saved some money, I think that would have made the Pixel more successful. Or alternatively, if they had made it more premium, made it come out like 3 months earlier at the very least, so much closer to like the latest Galaxy S series, and especially if they had started making their own chips much earlier, then I think we would be in a very different position where Google potentially holds like 3 or 4% of the smartphone market, being an actual meaningful player. Sure, still behind iPhone by 2 to 3 times, still being behind Samsung by like 5-6 times, whatever, maybe more, but it would be a completely different playing field, and we would see those comparisons way more with Pixels, because yeah, we will see like comparisons to the Pixel 7, I assume, and then to the Pixel 8, but quite honestly I don't really care at that point, because I don't think that those are very good phones in general.
On the S23 Ultra, Yes, you can change the type of blur, but this is more fun rather than practical. Now let's look at another portrait shot. Again, I think...
Again, for one, like, look at the HDR difference here. Like, we could argue that his jeans are black, right? But they do look like they're literally a black hole here. This is not how they looked in broad daylight situation. Yeah, like, the street is darker. It's hard to say which one has more detail, because some of it will still be like over sharpened on both. The iPhone does look a little better in that regard to me, at the very least. But yeah, I don't even consider this like a big portrait thing, right? I just consider this an image that I would take. And thankfully with the iPhone, I wouldn't even have to decide what kind of picture I'm capturing here. I would just be capturing it, and then later on it would tell me, do you want to make it a portrait?
Both are doing really well here. The S23 Ultra, I would say, has the better blacks, but the iPhone has better dynamic range. Now, the next stop for portraits on the iPhone is 2x. This is where it kind of crops in to the middle of the sensor, so you're still getting lossless zoom, but it's...
and this is where I will really, like, I don't want to rant a lot, but like, you're comparing an optical zoom camera versus a 2x digital crop. I fully understand the idea that, like, oh, those are very close together. However, that logic equally applies between the 3x optical zoom and the iPhone's 5x optical zoom, right? If you want to make the statement that 2 and 3x are so close together that they should be compared, you can make the same point about 3x and 5x. Like, from 2x to 3x, it's like it's a 50% zoom. From 3x to 5x, it's a 66% zoom. It's all something that you could mostly manage. If you take 3x as a baseline, right, you could get a little closer and capture with the 2x. Or what you could alternatively do is you could like, go a little further away and capture with the 5x. So this idea that the natural counterpart to the 3x is the 2x, which is a digital zoom, which, I mean, sure, technically is lossless because it's pixel by pixel perfect, but it's not usually what I would mean lossless. To me, lossless is optical, optical based on the same lens and stuff like that. So yeah, I completely disagree with this core comparison, because of course a native 70, what is this, like, this is a 70mm lens, this is this is what? This is a 48mm. Yeah, of course they will have, well, it's not only that, it's 48mm, but the core is a 24mm main sensor. So yeah, a digital zoom will not provide you the same, like, bokeh in the background or something like that. So yeah, this is a meaningless comparison. This should all be done 3x versus 5x, and then he should be outlining the practical differences between 3 and 5x, with the sense of that sometimes you have to really move more because one does this better or that better, right? And then on if you're doing like 2x comparisons, from what I understand, Samsung added like a 2x mode or something like that, didn't they? Which, it doesn't even matter, it's just a mode. You can zoom in to 2x on the Samsung phone without problem. So I really don't understand why this is the comparison we have. Look, it's not I don't think he's doing this in bad faith. I just think he's doing something wrong.
Not as good as the optical zoom that you're going to get on the S23 Ultra at 3x for this portrait. And I really do like the portrait that's come out of here on the S23 Ultra.
As do I.
On the iPhone, you can still get portraits at 3x, because you can just take a normal photo at 3x and then turn it into a portrait later, like I have done here. So it's nice to have that flexibility. However, it is not as sharp as...
I mean, that's really, well, I don't know, like, he would probably have to decide himself where he likes his color tone more. I think he looks better in the iPhone, on the iPhone, but that's not for me to decide in this specific case, I think. I think, like, the beard looks way too dark. I think this looks still over-processed for the most part. It neither looks great, to be honest. what is this? This is a 3x, which would be an equivalent to 77 millimeters. So yeah, it's not by no means bad. It's just not something how I would like handle this specific comparison. I think like I believe he's making a video with like the regular 13 Pro. Makes me kind of wonder if we could get like a 3x optical versus the 3x optical, which granted this is the one advantage that the S23 Ultra actually has, which is its multiple lenses, and this is why I'm such a big advocate for variable zoom technology to eventually make its way to more and more flagships. And I really hope that the S24 Ultra will kick the butt of the 15 Pro Max with a variable zoom camera that is like between like 4x and like 8x or something like that. I think that will be a massive win for Samsung, and I would really support it because I also think this would push Apple towards adopting this technology.
The optical zoom that you've got on,
like the difference in actual like portraitness, I think that what you probably see here is a lot of natural bokeh that just comes from 70 millimeters. However, I'm extremely impressed by Apple's software rendition of bokeh. If they can, like, this looks extremely physics accurate. That's really impressive.
S23 Ultra. Now, having said that, the iPhone 15 Pro Max does have a 5x optical zoom lens, so you can get portraits at 5x. And this is a very...
And this is where the difference between optical-based bokeh and software-based bokeh. For one, when you look like between his arms, right? Now, both of those images are basically great in that regard, right? There are no portrait issues with edge detection or something like that. However, the reason why a 5x for one is so good, well, it's a natural 120 millimeter lens, so that's fantastic for portraits. It's like around 100 millimeters is where you start getting really good portraits, and I'm really glad that Apple's leveraging it. Like, look at just the color difference between like himself, his shirt, like you could argue that the iPhone is too warm. Again, really easy to correct that with photographic styles. And then beyond that, the level of detail, of course, here, because you know, if you actually want to see the face, it's just such a big difference in my opinion. So yeah, this is why I've been saying this is the comparison that should have been made, and the only thing that the 3x does that the 5x probably will lose the ability to do is show you a lot more of the background in a still somewhat visible way. However, for that, I kind of almost prefer just going a little closer with the main camera, which is a larger sensor, so it also has a good natural bokeh. And by going closer to the actual object, or in this case the person, your bokeh increases. So the images that he is showing that are very wide, very far removed, they work almost exclusively through software bokeh, where the optical zoom lenses will be far superior to the main camera. However, if you actually use the main camera correctly and move in closer to the subject, then you, in my opinion, you would get something that is better than the 3x, without sacrificing the ability to provide context of what is going on behind the subject, while on the 5x obviously the bokeh is so much more intense that you do lose that, which again has its own visual appeal. This is how actual most photographers prefer bokeh to look like.
Very interesting focal length because it gives you some really nice compression and some really natural looking bokeh. You can see here in this example, I've got 3x on the S23 Ultra, which is doing pretty well, but I really do like this 5x portrait on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and the edges are so good. It's even managed to get that single strand of hair that's just floating on.
Yeah, like the detail is absolutely incomparable, and it just looks so much more human. Like a lot of this on the Galaxy turns into like grayish tones, like around where, like, I know his hair is gray, right? But then you look at his forehead, and it is similarly gray to his hair, which obviously does not look great, and it's not his natural skin tone. Kind of leads me to believe that Apple might have done a lot of color science correction for non-white people, which would be really, really nice. I know that Google Pixels have for years been a little better in like brown skin tones and black skin tones. So this to me is like an extremely positive direction for Apple to take. I've preferred his skin tone in basically every image.
Top of my head. So although the S23 Ultra does take good portraits, the iPhone 15 Pro Max just has a lot more versatility. Now, when it comes to low light portraits, it's very interesting. Now, similar to low light photos on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, if you are taking...
Guys, I don't care how often I have to say this. We added, since I last mentioned, we added 4 new subscribers. So giant heart out to all of you. This is insane. So this means we added like what, like 4 and 2 and 3, right? We added 9 subscribers since starting this stream, as far as I understand. That is so crazy to me. It used to take me days to gain like 5 or 10 to 10 subscribers, and now we are doing that in minutes.
Low light portraits, it is going to switch back to 12 megapixels, and I found that consistently the S23 Ultra did take better portraits in low light. They were sharper.
By the way, this is where I will agree with him. I do think that the Galaxy S23 image looks somewhat nicer. I still do prefer his skin tone greatly on the iPhone. However, I think neither image looks good, to be honest. This is one of those scenarios where, you know how when night mode originally came out, and there were some scenarios where it really wouldn't do much, or it would take such a long time that it really was like, oh man, why am I even trying this? And I don't mean the 11 Pro, I do mean like the early Pixels. But even the 11 Pro had like some moments where like, why are you even trying night mode if the end result is that bad? Tell me that it is basically worthless. Don't waste my time. This is where automatic mode would actually be great. This is the kind of photo where I don't think I would be happy to display this as an S23 Ultra and iPhone 15 Pro Max picture. Do I believe that the Galaxy looks a little better in some ways? Probably, right? The ground looks sharper, which is an interesting thing about a portrait mode photo. I almost wonder if this would just be better as a natural. Again, this is why his like Theanchai, welcome to the stream. Very glad you could join. This is why his like him liking capturing those white portraits, to me this is not really how portraits like are seen by most people. Every portrait that I take is usually something where people tell me, oh, I really want my hair to like look pretty, how it falls off, or make sure that my dress, do you notice that most of my friends are women, by the way, make sure that like my dress is like hugging my body correctly or something like that. And then make sure that the background like has like the colors of the actual environment. They never ask me to preserve the structures around them. This is what regular photography is for, not portrait photography. So
better edges. Here's another.
Yeah, I don't think the edges here really matter. Where would even be like the edge being like wrongly detected here? Like there's basically no small gaps here. Usually, but his pose is pretty good for testing it. It just so happens that some of it will be solved also by like natural bokeh, and I do like in the problem with dark portraits, and I think this is what like it's kind of like a mind thing for me. It's like to me, if I capture a dark picture and the background is washed out and unfocused, to me that looks like a problem. To me that looks like it wasn't captured correctly. While in a bright image, usually if the background is like really soft, I associate that with bokeh, natural bokeh. So what happens if you capture portrait modes in the dark, you end up like not getting the desired effect that you would usually have with portrait modes. It's actually quite interesting. I think now why I know why I don't like those specific images on either phone. Also, I do think that the iPhone does look better here.
Example, again, I think the S23 Ultra has done better in terms of the edges. The iPhone 15 Pro Max has blurred out my hair a little bit. Now here on the iPhone, you can't actually use any focal length because the depth effect will not work in night mode, but you can still...
Yeah, looks better on the Galaxy. Kind of makes me wonder, what does the 5X do? I don't remember that from my first viewing. Once again, meaningless comparison. Move a little further behind, use the actual optical zoom.
We'll take portraits at 1x, 2x, as well as 5x. Now if we compare the 3x on the S23 Ultra versus the 2x on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now neither of these are perfect, but the iPhone is a little bit noisy for my liking, and I do prefer the S23 Ultra here. But it didn't seem like the iPhone wanted to take any portraits at anything.
Yeah, this is where I would say the iPhone is actually doing a good job to preventing you from taking bad pictures. Once again, I do want variable zoom that works somewhere between 4x. It's by the way, if somebody thinks that I'm defending the iPhone here, I'm absolutely not. The Galaxy is kicking its butt with this particular image. I have no problems in admitting that. It just so happens that yeah, I don't think that I would want to post the left image either.
Light. However, I would say that this is really pushing it and we can't really do a like-for-like comparison. So those are the portraits. Now let's take a look at zoom, because now we have a brand new 5x telephoto camera on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Where did you come from? Hey, SuperSaf here. You found the new office? Dude, you're really not hard to find. Anyway guys, you know what, I want to remind you, if you haven't already, then do consider subscribing and hit that bell icon. We're actually working on a detailed comparison between the S23 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro.
Yeah, I think I got that wrong. I said that there would be a more detailed comparison in terms of them like as cameras. This will be a comparison between them as smartphones basically. So I assume like battery life, display stuff, how they feel in the hand, shit like that. The action button functionality versus Android customization. That's how I would approach it, but yeah.
All of the differences as well as the cameras, you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be here very, very soon. I'll see you next time. You heard the man. If you haven't already, then do consider subscribing.
Say hello to Bella.
Lots more content coming up on here soon.
Bella.
Telephoto cameras. Now, the first thing to mention is that the iPhone does have lots of different focal lengths that you can now get with a lossless zoom. So you've got 1.2 as well as 1.5.
I am sorry, I'll just have to untangle her. Bella, stop moving just for a second. Jesus, if you would have let me help, it wouldn't have hurt. She got tangled up in my headphones. This is like she's an AirPods fan now. Jesus, I was afraid she would eat them to get out of them, but all seems to be okay. I just bought those. Those are the 19 euro USB-C AirPods.
I do like the flexibility. Apple did say it's the equivalent of having 7 different lenses, which I think is a bit of a push, but it is not.
I think that's a fair way to describe it. It's a little bit of a push to say it's like extra lenses, but it's definitely extra highly optimized modes at specific like lens settings, one would say. You really need nuance to describe it. I've said in my previous video that I think that any reviewer who just calls it bullshit because they didn't bother to read how those modes actually work, and thank you again for Mr. Who's the Boss for providing that those modes are actually sharper. it just so happens, which it just so happens to be a phrase I use a lot, but for some reason today. But to me, when you criticize something, it's important that you understand it as a reviewer. As a consumer, that's not your concern. If you don't like a final result of something, then you are free to complain. If you feel a marketing push has really greatly misled you, then you're free to complain. If you're like a physics guy and you're really into optics and you really want to complain that those lenses are not actual lenses, that's also fine. But if you are a camera and smartphone reviewer and you really lose a ton of time on like, oh, those are not actual lenses, oh, then that to me is when you're taking away from your own time, from the time of the people watching you, when basically nobody is served by how you behave.
Nice to have that flexibility nevertheless. And like we had with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, although you don't have a 3x optical zoom camera, you can still use 2x zoom, which is going to be cropping into the middle part of the sensor, which is essentially still going to give you lossless zoom. Now, what I found with zoom is that if you were taking pictures between 1 to up to 2...
By the way, this is where all my predictions have been correct. Let me just briefly... No, I'm probably gonna stay in the middle. I know it's like not the most optimal position, but
0.9x on the iPhone 15.
It's where I cover up the least of either image, right? Yes, 2.9x. The iPhone 15 Pro Max looks sharper. Because this is before the well, that's because the main camera on the iPhone behaves better than on the S23 Ultra. Also, by the way, like the iPhones have had like year-long problems with being too warm. I would argue that the S23 Ultra looks much warmer here. Also, the background is like a complete destruction of the S23 versus the iPhone, where the iPhone has basically like no visible noise unless you like really go into it, while on the Samsung, if you look at the top, it looks far more noisy. Maybe it's the wall they're capturing it, but even if it's technically designed from like the Samsung to show any kind of detail that it might have perceived on the wall, I don't consider that like a good thing to try to do. I think the iPhone wins here by a lot, actually. Like, look at some elements of like the neck here. Again, I will describe where I'm pointing with my mouse pointer, because I have not found out how to show it during a media source presentation in OBS. But you can see how much is over-sharpened and how much detail is like artificially created on the Samsung. Again, neither sensor is fantastic by like real camera standards, and you could argue that both sensors at this point should be like at least 10 to 15% larger, something like the Xiaomi full 1-inch frame sensors, while this is like 1 by 1.3. So yeah, it's a little hard to like not say just how much better the iPhone is. Mail, sorry I'm late. Is there a clear winner in video? Video feels 3 times more important to me than still pics these days. To me, the clear winner is the iPhone across the board. Here, there will be some things like later on where the Galaxy wins, so please bear with me as we analyze this. But for example, on the night mode thing, right, he had a somewhat nuanced position, but I've been very critical of his methodology. So if anybody joins late, I will try to label those parts later on by making a VOD. So anybody who is already here, please consider staying, watching the rest with me. I will obviously also go back to certain points that were important. And then we will also go through the PetaPixel review, which is not a comparison review, it's just a very good in-depth camera review in general.
Pro Max, it would give you better results compared to the S23 Ultra. However, as soon as you got to 3x, that's when the optical zoom camera of the S23 Ultra kicks in. And it does give you sharper results, understandably. Now, when you go from 3x all the way to around 4.9x, then the S23 Ultra is still going to be giving you better zoom compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
Again, this is where variable zoom would solve the problem for both. Samsung wouldn't need to put in 2 different telephoto cameras in it. Apple wouldn't have to decide between 3 and 5x and stuff like that. And advertising to people that you have real optical zoom in a smartphone, similar to what those people expect from a real professional camera, it would be a huge boom to anybody who is like a camera enthusiast.
But as soon as you hit 5x optical zoom, then that's when the optical zoom camera of the iPhone 15 Pro Max kicks in. Are you seeing a trend here? And you'll see here that we do have sharper results on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now this is going to carry on all the way up to around 9.9x.
Yes, and this is in bright highlights. AVMail, you asked if there is like a clear winner here. Now, you will see something soon where this will be a big back and forth between like cameras where one will like win decisively, but then lose the entire war, in my opinion. So I will really try to hammer home my point here that I've been also trying to hammer home on Twitter or on X or whatever you want to call it.
When you hit 10x, then that's when the periscope zoom camera of the S23 Ultra kicks in.
Yes, Samsung captures very good 10x zooms in broad daylight with their 10 megapixel camera with a worse aperture and a smaller sensor overall than the 15 Pro Max 5x sensor. However, and this is something that will follow soon, we will see very different results once we turn the light a little down.
And that will give you sharper results. Looking at this image, especially if you look towards the text, the S23 Ultra is giving you sharper text. Now the iPhone 15 Pro Max can now go up to 25 times with digital zoom, and at 25x the iPhone is still doing pretty decent and especially better compared to the iPhone 14 Pro Max. But this is where the S23 Ultra really shines. Look at all the text, it's clearly visible and it's crisp on the S23 Ultra, whereas you are now starting to struggle with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now I tried this in different situations and I got the exact same results. I think it's really going to...
Yes, and Samsung also does a little bit of software correction for text. I 100% agree with him here that Samsung does take better 10x zooms and beyond in good lighting conditions. I have zero problems admitting that. However...
Come down to what type of zoom do you want? Do you want extended zoom? Then the S23 Ultra will be for you. Do you want the ability to zoom?
Ahmad, hi. I don't think I've seen your name in the chat. Very glad you could join us. I obviously don't know like the 100 people who have joined in the last couple of days. It's kind of insane.
Up to 10 times, then I would go for the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now, of course, the S23 Ultra can zoom all the way up to 100 times. Now, this is something that I don't use much at all. It is a bit of a gimmick. And yes, you can take pictures of the moon. It's been cloudy here in the UK over the past week, so I've not been able to
with a lot of software help
take any pictures of the moon and compare them as yet. But I will do some comparisons on my Instagram when the moon is out, so if you want to follow me on there, I'm at SuperSaf. Now, one interesting thing is that the iPhone 15 Pro Max's telephoto camera actually has a pretty wide aperture, wider than...
and a larger sensor.
Most others. So I really wanted to see how the telephoto cameras compared in low light, and the results were quite interesting. So at 5x,
look at this. This will be, oh my god, I don't know, guys, please zoom in if you can, like with that new YouTube feature. I mean, it's not that new, like this detail difference. This is what I've been talking about. Like, for one, we are at 5x, so of course the iPhone will win, right? It's using an optical sensor, but look what will happen soon.
Is doing better, but then at 10x I was expecting the S23 Ultra.
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. AVMail, you said the Samsung is unusable. Yes, the 10X is absolutely unusable in low light. And to me, it's not about the details, right? I mean, yeah, on the iPhone I say, if you can read this, you're coming too close. Or does it say if you're effing too close? Again, I have to read it through OBS, so I cannot zoom in into the native capture. I could read it on my TV. Like, this is what I've been saying for such a while. This is why I've been such an advocate for variable zoom or for reasonable zoom with much larger sensor. My perfect zoom camera, if it's not variable, would probably be a 4x zoom with as large as fucking sensor as possible. Also, if you make like basically the whole arrangement a little different, you can also make the aperture a little larger. This is why I believe the 3x telephoto on the Samsung actually has a decently wide aperture, right? Because once you go to the tetraprism designs and the periscope designs, this is when your entire camera assembly changes and the aperture suffers. So this to me is such a huge difference, and people will not comprehend this. Like in the review from The Verge yesterday, they were like, well, if you want to capture photos from further away, the Galaxy with its 10x zoom will do a better job for you. Well, guess what, bitch? Like, and I don't call the woman bitch in the review, I call the review process of The Verge a bitch. Guess what? It doesn't. Like, and by the way, this like goes for like, obviously this is dark, right? But it also is true for very unnatural light sources that are somewhat dim, which is basically your evening scenarios at home, right? Unless you like blinding yourself like I do to look decent in front of the camera during my streams. This to me is like mind-boggling that people don't seem to understand this, and this is why I'm so glad he deliberately he did it this perfectly here. This is why I was so angry he didn't do it with night mode, right? Because he mentioned the technological difference. Now he mentioned the aperture. There is some difference, like the sensor size. I also believe the sensors in general a little more modern probably than what Samsung uses, because they've been like reusing the same periscope assembly now for years and years, because it's clearly apparently super expensive to redesign it. It also apparently is not very price scalable because they haven't brought it to anything else really. So I kind of am currently on the Apple and Google train of using 5x instead. By the way, this result of a 5x with decent aperture and a larger sensor winning against a periscope small sensor 10x arrangement is not the first occasion. Google has already won, in my opinion, against the S23 Ultra with its 5x zoom camera and also super res zoom, which helps also with some software algorithms for that. That is such a huge difference here. I don't know how people don't understand this. That good light scenario we just saw with him peeking out behind the sign, I mean, that's cool, but how often will you do something like this where you actually want to be like 15, 25x zooming in? This is just 10x, which sure, 10x is not, for me it's not common. I would come in closer, but then imagine what would happen with me coming closer. Then I would need to consider, will I turn in 3x for this? Now I have to come in 3 times closer, right? And then with 5x, this is where I stand already, right? So again, it's a different thing here.
To do better, but this was not the case. He actually struggled to focus on me. Now, extending it all the way to 25 times, the iPhone here you can see is doing way better than the S23 Ultra, even though the S23 Ultra has a 10 times optical zoom camera compared to the 5 times optical zoom camera. So everything in addition is coming digitally. But I think this is really where that wider aperture helps the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So if low light zoom is your thing, then the iPhone is doing better. Right, now for the ultra wide cameras, I think both actually do really well. The iPhone is slightly wider in this.
Yes, and the slightly wider thing is also what hurts it in like light aggregation stuff. It's ever so slightly, so I'm not gonna blame everything here. I do still prefer the colors on the iPhone in general. However, I can easily admit that the HDR here is a little better on the Samsung. You can see it in like the tall tower building, where it actually preserves a little more detail overall, I kind of find the iPhone image almost a little more pleasing in general, but that's a small difference. It's a preference difference. Overall, purely technologically, I might give the leg up to Samsung for objectively dealing a little better with light here.
Image, I prefer the S23 Ultra. I think it's got slightly better dynamic range. But in this image, I prefer the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Especially in the shadow areas, it has maintained more detail compared to the S23 Ultra. But in this image, I prefer the S23 Ultra because it has maintained better shadow detail and it has better dynamic range.
Agreed,
so things
agreed.
can go back and forth, but overall, I do tend to...
Which is actually interesting. It almost makes me wonder if like Smart HDR5 is not yet fully optimized for the ultra wide in a way, because I clearly remember preferring the 14 Pro ultra wide versus the Galaxy S23 ultra wide. Maybe the testing scenarios usually were a little brighter, which could like compensate for its other problems, because as I said, I do prefer the overall color science in the image. It just so happens, oh my god, why am I constantly using this phrase today? But the Samsung definitely has better HDR on the ultra wide, which makes me kind of think back to the 14 Pro and like, well, why did the 14 Pro sometimes win against the S23 Ultra more often to me than the 15 Pro does, which has the far better Smart HDR5 and is proving that across the main sensor and the zoom lenses. So yeah, that's one thing that is a little surprising to me, but I have no problem admitting that. Ultra wide seems a little better on the Samsung, though it is a little wider on the iPhone, which has its own like advantages. Even 10%, which is not by any means a lot, but it is a difference that could legitimately like be the difference between like a wow ultra wide and like an ooh ultra wide. You know what I mean?
Lean towards the S23 Ultra when it comes to ultra wide images, and that is also because of macro photography. Now, both of these take excellent macro shots. You can focus in a little bit closer on the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
Yes, and those photos will look vastly different if you zoom in a little less on the iPhone. Why do you not have the equivalent distance here? Look, this is, I assume it's the same. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 versus half. 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, 10.5. So this is a 20% like further away. I don't get it. Like, why do you not go a little further away from the iPhone with the iPhone to match it? Because this like loss of detail, this comes from the camera being extremely close to the center. That is why the center is more sharp here on the iPhone, but why there's this like, well, to photographers this is an incredibly beautiful effect, but I kind of understand why somebody might want edge-to-edge sharpness. And the fallacy that he is engaging in here is he is basically like providing us evidence with the iPhone not being able to provide edge-to-edge sharpness in its ultra-wide mode, which yes, it doesn't once you get this close. I've recently tried capturing an image of a little spider, but I had to get so close because it was so fucking small that basically only its head was sharp, and even like the front legs already were not sharp. So that was difficult. Also, it was pretty dark for the ultra wide, admittedly. But to me, this is fascinating because this is the wrong approach to this test. Once again.
But I do find the results a little bit more pleasing on the S23 Ultra, as you...
Yeah, well, I can kind of see that here, like the water is falling off in like a more sharp way. The reflections are a little more pronounced. Again, you are closer in on the iPhone. Are you? It's hard to tell. It's a slightly different perspective. I do prefer like the more saturated look here on the Galaxy. I think it works well for macro modes. I don't think macro modes need to adhere to the same level of authenticity to real world as like the main camera mode has to.
You can see here, look at all those raindrops. Now this might be down to some of the processing that Samsung does, but hey, I like it. Again, in this example,
It definitely
although
will
the
be
iPhone is doing
partially at
really
the very
well,
least.
I just prefer the slightly more contrasty image on the S23 Ultra.
By the way, guys, can you fully hear me? I don't know, like I think I've changed this. Okay, yeah, you should be able to hear me.
You can just see those droplets a little bit clearer. Now, for images in low light with the ultra-wide camera, here I prefer the S23 Ultra. It's just that
I think both images are garbage. This is why I'm saying, like, there are some scenarios where it's like, well, for one, the iPhone is brighter in some ways, right? It's handling the path with a lot more, with far less pronounced shadows. Yeah, I wouldn't use either image, to be honest. I honestly cannot take a favorite. I cannot decide on a favorite here whatsoever. They both look like trash.
tad sharper. Now remember, this place was super dark. Again, another ultra-wide shot. Once again, I prefer the S23 Ultra. If you look at the paving, it is more detailed compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now in this image, although the S23 Ultra is brighter, there is a lot of lens flaring going on. Look at all of that pink and...
Yeah, also like I don't know, like the way the bridge looks, I don't know, like it just sometimes happens with the way like Androids approach like night mode. It just often looks like daylight, but with a weird filter. Like, I don't know, I really like how it gets like somewhat darker to the end. Like, I do like the foreground plants more on the Samsung actually. Again, because of the flare, I would definitely pick the iPhone overall here. But I do know that the iPhone will sometimes have like bad lens flares as well. So this is not like a slam dunk by any means for the iPhone. Probably dependent slightly even on the angle that you took it in. But also this, by the way, goes back to some of the discussions where people are saying, oh, the iPhone has like uniquely lens flare problems. That just simply isn't true. All smartphones to a degree have lens flare problems. Maybe iPhone is a little worse, or was a little worse in some ways. It never was as egregious as some made it out to be. AVMail, is there a reason he's comparing the Samsung to iPhone? Isn't the Pixel the current best Android camera? You could say that. I don't think I've been such a big fan of the Pixel 7 Pro. I do believe that it's 5x zoom is like better than Samsung's 10x, for example, in like the specific ways that the iPhone also shows it to be better. The overall color science I might still prefer in the Pixel. I think detail is usually where the Galaxy might even win often. I apologize, something was wrong with my internet right now. This is, oh no, we might have switched ingest servers from YouTube. That happens sometimes. I think this is because this is a stream that had more people watching than usual, so they decided to probably put me on a different server, because my internet is actually fine. Like, because it was like at 12,000 kilobits and then it just dropped. Like in a crazy way, in a way it never usually does.
Purple, which I do not like. So here I prefer the iPhone 15 Pro Max, although overall I would say ultra-wide. Also,
AVMail, you ask why he's comparing to the Galaxy. It's because the Galaxy is more popular than the Pixel. I mean, in that regard, it's actually a pretty pro-consumer approach to test it against the arguably much more relevant phone. Also, the Pixel will soon be surpassed by its own sequel, while we'll have to wait until February till we get like Galaxy S24 Ultra results. So this is where I think his mindset is kind of coming from.
Camera, I do prefer the S23 Ultra. Right now for selfies, I think both actually do really well. They have lots of detail. The iPhone 15 Pro Max is slightly wider, and again, with the iPhone, you can just take a...
I cannot comment that much on selfies. Quite honestly, I don't have a big love for selfies. This is the only way that foldables will ever convince me, because I do prefer the real cameras on the back. I actually would say I probably prefer the Samsung in terms of like detail. In terms of selfies, I do prefer the iPhone's HDR handling, so it's probably mostly a wash, but most definitely I don't really care. I would probably give the leg up to iPhone simply for the way it's currently handling portraits, which to me would be a very positive thing in selfies. But it's by no means a big margin here.
Selfie and then turn it into a portrait mode selfie after the fact, and you can also change the focus of it. Here in this shot, although both are doing better, and I think the colors are a bit more true on the S23 Ultra, I do prefer the edges on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Apple has really done some good work in terms of edge detection. You can see that my hair strands that are floating have not been cut off. They've still been maintained there on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is...
He's like almost proud of that little bit of hair that's always flowing out. I think it kind of maybe reminds him of better hair days where he would have like a luscious mane to like move back, and like those 3 hairs that are sticking out might be reminding him of it. Obviously my hair isn't all what it used to be, but this is extremely short for me. This is cut, but like this here is like, it's not something that I used to have as pronounced, but obviously it's very different than what he has. Ivy Mail, same, I completely ignore selfies as a category, but everyone has their own use case, I guess. Yeah, this is why I'm okay with him, completely okay with him testing it. It's just, I like that he actually almost moves through the selfies really quickly. It kind of shows that they aren't that relevant. I would say selfies also tend to sometimes look bad on all phones in situations where, I mean, yeah, I understand you don't always have somebody to take a picture of, but my question is like, what exactly are you taking a picture of most of the time, right? Like, would you, like a building behind you? Selfies look trash when it comes to that. Like, maybe just a sign where exactly you are, just for like a tourist selfie, I guess. But like, imagine if you're standing in Rome and you have like the Peter's Dome, the cathedral behind you, right? And then you take a selfie. But even the very like small sensor will still create a bokeh behind you, so you don't actually see the building, but you also didn't capture enough detail for either your face or the cathedral. So like at this point, be fucking annoying, get a selfie stick, in my opinion. This idea of like selfies, I've never bought into it. Maybe if Apple really changes the core sensor and stuff like that. They've already added stuff like autofocus, and Samsung is offering like more pixels, but look also at the detail in his beard. Like, pixels are not always everything when it comes to detail capture. Also, the front camera on the iPhone has a decently wide aperture now. So again, they are doing some stuff, but to me, like, like what he's capturing right now with that building behind him, what is the value here, right? Like, the building is not in focus, he is in focus. So like, look, I've been here and look at this image and look at this building behind me that you cannot see. It's also, it doesn't look as good as what you would get from like from a real camera on the back. I know they're all real cameras, but you know what I mean.
Super impressive. The S23 Ultra has taken those off, which actually might be good, but the edge detection is not as good as the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now, selfies in low light, both of them have kind of like a night mode for selfies. And I really don't like this because when you're trying to hold the camera still at this distance, it's really not good. Usually I would use the front-facing flash, which is just basically illuminating the display.
Yeah, I have found that Apple really does not care about that front flash mode in any way. Like, if they really care, they would have created an algorithm where it stays on for a certain period of time. Maybe does instead of flashing once really brightly, instead doing maybe some like night mode where it uses the extra light for like a couple of maybe for just 2 seconds of like light aggregation and stuff like that. To me, none of those images look good. I wouldn't use any of them. Samsung probably looks a little sharper, so I have no problem giving Samsung the win here. I just really don't care.
And here, I think both are doing pretty okay.
They're both trash.
I'd have to put it a bit of a draw. I don't like either too much, to be
yeah.
fair. Right,
they're
for
bad.
video. When we're looking at regular video taken at 4K, I think both are really good. But I think this is the same story once again.
I don't actually think, like, this looks really over sharpened on the Samsung. Like, I can tell that right away. This detail that is there in like the lines, sometimes it's not there. This is why it sometimes almost shimmers, because it's not like trying to actually display what pixels are on the sensor are actually like detecting what color and stuff. There's a lot of like interpretation going on here.
And the iPhone 15 Pro Max just
Also so much better HDR handling. Like, also, like, this is like the Sierra blue on the iPhone 13 Pro. I guarantee you the sky did not look this way. I'm showing the sky right now on the Galaxy. Look at the highest up cloud on the Galaxy S23 Ultra. This is actually fascinating because there are visible artifacts here that do not come from a lack of detail, but from over sharpening. Like, some of the contours of the cloud do not look natural at all. They are way too sharp for this, and by sharp I mean way too angular. So this is where the iPhone, like, clearly is not giving you just a better image, but a more natural image. So to me, this is a slam dunk for the iPhone. Also, again, the iPhone does have very easy ProRes recording if you wanted to do it. Unfortunately, ProRes is limited to 4K at 30 if you're not recording to an external drive. And I do like 4K 60, so this is why I'm usually limited to, well, on my 13 Pro Max I'm limited either way, but I will still capture 4K 60 regular because I do not like how 30 FPS feels. But yeah, the iPhone destroys the Samsung here. Like, just looking at like the lamppost here and stuff like that, the tree, there's so much fake detail here versus the iPhone, slightly softer but still pretty detailed image, right? It's not like softness erases all detail, it's just that softness makes it feel far more human eye-ish.
does such a good job when it comes to dynamic range. You can see all of
The stabilization also seems to be better on the 15 Pro Max.
shadow detail here. Now, both devices can shoot in HDR, high dynamic range, but I would say the iPhone is more versatile because
It's way better at HDR. It supports Dolby HDR. Now, if you really want to make your own HDR sync, use fucking log. There's like no comparison here, none whatsoever. AVML, turn the phone around and use the main camera for selfie. Yeah, I know, it also works. I know, it just, you cannot see it, right? This is where the automaticness is kind of not maintained. Maybe Apple should put in like a very small display on the back next to the camera.
it's easier to use and it's easier to take over to different places. On the S23 Ultra, it is kind of hidden, and if you do want to export it, you do have to select this setting, which wasn't working for me on.
Big shout out to all of you guys. We have added 20 subscribers during this stream, or 19, but it's close enough anyway. We're at 324. Guys, 15 minutes before I started the stream, we just hit 300. And then we had like 2 news, and this is insane. Like, I'm so grateful. You guys cannot imagine how much this means to me.
The S23 Ultra for some reason, I don't know what was going on, but with the iPhone, just dynamic range generally, even if you're not using HDR, is just better. Now, for low light video, I'm sure a lot of you guys are wondering, do you still get those little balls of light on the iPhone 15 Pro Max because of the lens flare? Yes, you do. That is still here. It's,
I mean, they're on both. They're more pronounced than the iPhone. I have no problem admitting that.
not as present on the S23 Ultra. However, when it
But the image quality is so different. Like, why would I bother? Like, I will gladly accept those lens flares. Like, look, those images look like they were taken two smart. Like, those videos were look like they were taken 2 smartphone generations apart.
comes to overall video quality, in low light.
Also, look at how much of its stability the S23 loses. The S23 Ultra has very decent image stabilization. It completely goes haywire in low light.
Once again, the iPhone 15 Pro Max
Yeah, it's just
gives you better overall results.
Look at how also the iPhone behaves with focus. For one, it's not dark, it's not black, what the S23 Ultra is currently displaying. But look at how it just automatically focused on the leaves here, tries to get some light for the path. This looks actually like it by no means looks good, right? But with videos, it's not the same as with photography. You cannot always like say, oh, this looks bad, so I'm not just gonna capture it. Obviously, if you're in a continuous like capture phase and you're maybe like just covering wherever you're going, or for whatever reason you might do it, you might be a vlogger or something like that, or you might just love capturing every moment. It just so happens you have no moment to like refocus, reposition. Every moment gets captured, even if you refocus and reposition during it. And that movement from like somewhat decent light to absolutely almost no light for the Samsung, it looks like this is a comparison between an iPhone 15 Pro Max, not versus the S23 Ultra, but versus an S21 Ultra. Like this would be excusable in my opinion. Even if this was like an S22 Ultra versus an iPhone 15 Pro Max, I would still be saying, well, they only have like 18 months difference between them. If the S24 Ultra, like I doubt the S24 Ultra will be able to catch up. The sensor difference is just not enough, and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is not that meaningfully more powerful in terms of its image signal processor.
With the ability to capture in pretty much darkness. I mean, this place was super dark, and you can barely see anything on the S23 Ultra, but you can still make stuff out on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now for stabilization, I think both are actually really good at 4K, and it was a bit of a draw, but of course, you guys want to see action mode.
The iPhone wins. Like, I can already see the small stutter. It's by no means bad, right? I think the more interesting comparison is almost like the iPhone 15 Pro versus the S23 and S23 Plus, because those do not have the same great stabilization, which obviously also comes because the S23 Ultra has the larger sensor over the S23 and S23 Plus, so it can zoom in a little more. Also, look at the level of detail on his head. The colors, like his skin looks gray in the Samsung video. Yeah, it's video is absolutely no contest. AVMail, you asked specifically about video when you joined us. Do you agree with me here?
Versus Super Steady. Action mode is at a slightly higher resolution, and by default, both of these shoot with the ultra-wide camera when you're using action mode or Super Steady, and the results again are very close. However, when you do switch to the primary cameras with action mode and Super Steady, then the iPhone is more stable. So yeah, stabilization is pretty close, but I would have to give the overall win for stabilization to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now, one advantage that the S23 Ultra has is the fact that it can film at 8K.
Nope, it's not an advantage. It's a worthless mode given current constraints in processing power, the exact sensor being used, and you will actually see that because even the iPhone 14 Pro already won in 4K video quality versus an 8K video from the S23 Ultra. I don't expect the 15 Pro to perform any worse here. This is the point where I didn't watch the video yet, so this is where I could be surprised. So let's see.
Now, 8K has been improved massively on the S23 Ultra compared to previous generations. There is no longer a massive crop, and it's actually quite stable too. Now, I know not everybody shoots at 8K, but if you do want to have that option and you want lots of detail, then you have that with the S23 Ultra. You can even crop in and completely change your angle. This is something that you do not have on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. although I would still say dynamic range is better on the iPhone. Right, what about pro features?
This was such a worthless test. I think he did this, like, I don't know if it was him or Max Tech last year that did it way better, where they actually like zoomed in on 4K iPhone video versus 8K video, and in like great lighting they were basically identical, so there was no win from going with 8K. At this point you should consider going with ProRes on the iPhone, because that will also increase your size, but it will also make your image far easier to color grade later on, and it will give you detail that is actually really usable. The only advantage of 8K, the right one that he mentioned, is the zoom ability. It is not particularly great, given that it does not preserve the kind of quality level that you would have if you just started with a slightly larger crop but outputting to 4K. Yeah, so nope. 8K is no plus whatsoever currently. Maybe next gen, maybe finally Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 will handle data input fast enough, but nope, not currently.
Something I know you guys will want me to touch on. The S23 Ultra actually has a pro video mode with lots and lots of control over your shutter speed, white balance,
Yes, get Filmic Pro on the iPhone. It's better than any of those modes. You have to pay a little, but it is a way better app. Sucks a little that Apple does not offer that kind of functionality natively. However, neither does Samsung have alternatives currently for something like ProRes, log capture, and even their expert RAW mode, for one, is not as well integrated as Apple's ProRAW, but I would also say it delivers inferior results.
So, and if you are somebody who likes to kind of mess around with these settings, you're going to be able to do that natively on the S23 Ultra. On the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you will have to get an external app to do this. However, on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you do have ProRes recording with log. Now, some of you guys might be wondering, what am I talking about? Log is basically what pro videographers use. It's like a flat picture profile, which you can then add color to later on in post. And if you are somebody who likes to do this, this is now natively available on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is great to see. For slow motion, I think both are actually pretty good. The S23 does appear to be sharper. I'm not sure if this is...
AVMail, you're saying Samsung seems to be doing better at video. Yeah, the distance is not as big as it used to be in like the iPhone, like definitely in like the iPhone 4S days, right? But look at even like this like slow-mo video where his skin basically looks like he's dead. Like look, slow-mo with 1080p 240 fps, those modes suck on the iPhone as well. But just like in terms of me still looking like myself, I would definitely use the iPhone here. So yeah, the iPhone absolutely is still king. My argument here would be, how could it not be, given that the 14 Pro was still the king even after the launch of the S23 Ultra?
Pros sharpening, but I do prefer it. The S23 Ultra also has super slow mo, so this is at around 960 frames a second, but it is at 720p, so it is being upscaled quite a bit. However, the option is there. The iPhone does have a bit more versatility because you can shoot slow motion from all the different lenses, so you can use the ultra wide.
Oh, you cannot on the Samsung? I never knew that. I always wondered why Apple wouldn't give us at least like 480 FPS. I assume that's kind of because Apple does not like beyond like the ratings of the actual sensor, right? A sensor can record essentially as fast as you try and make it work, but I think Apple really does not like overdoing it for no reason. I think their argument is more like, oh, go from 240 to 60, which is 4 times slower, then go to 30, which is would be 8 times slower, and everything beyond that, yeah, just forget about it. Obviously, at 960, that's a lot, sure. How valuable that is for everybody else to decide. I have not even used 240 FPS for a long time.
Telephoto.
I think the last time I used it was like second to last New Year's, where I was capturing some fireworks stuff.
On the S23 Ultra, you only have the primary camera, so a few advantages and disadvantages here for both when it comes to slow motion. Now, for the front-facing camera, I think both are actually really good. However, the iPhone is wider, it's got better colors. My beard is not purple like it's starting to appear on the S23 Ultra.
Yeah, this looks like almost like a video that is being recorded from a screen, right? You know how like LCD, how like OLED will look very weird when you actually try capturing with a camera, because the camera will pick up on like the subtle like differences between subpixel arrangements and stuff like that. This is how it looks, almost like lilac sometimes. This is what this reminds me of. This is a very bad sensor reading almost. Like, I understand it's probably just Samsung's internal color science, but why is this really purple? AV Mail, maybe Apple will boost camera FPS once the Vision Pro comes out. That's the only viewing device I think could benefit. Yeah, maybe. Like, Apple does have 60 FPS recording. I think they're more likely to move up to like 120 FPS recording as a non-slow-mo mode than they would be to try to add like 480 FPS or 960. Maybe 480. Maybe they could move up like regular video up to 120, and then I have no idea what YouTube is doing with my video. Like, this has literally nothing to do with my internet. My internet has worked completely fine, but it just drops from 12,000 kilobits to basically 0. What is going on here? Oh, Jesus, YouTube. Regardless, what I was saying is that maybe once Apple goes up to 120 FPS is like a standard thing, right? I think they currently consider 60 almost standard, but maybe one time they will consider 60 as standard as 30 used to be, and then they would offer like a 120 mode. Yeah, that's kind of my speculation. At that point, 480 slow-mo and 960 could make some sense. It's just I don't think this is at any point the priority right now. Also, Vision Pro runs at 90 hertz, right? It doesn't run at 120 hertz.
Once again, you do get overall better dynamic range on the iPhone. In terms of stabilization from the front-facing camera, I think it is a bit of a draw. Now, for cinematic video, you saw the intro of this video. And although I would say neither is perfect, both of them were struggling a little bit with...
I have no idea like how you compare those two. Like, the iPhone looks like it was captured on an actual professional camera in comparison to this. This is what 5 years ago the difference between an actual camera and the smartphone looked like, right? This difference is absolutely inexcusable. Better HDR handling, like the fall off between like how the bokeh looks here, it's just so absolutely like, it's such a destruction. I have no idea how, like, this is the difference between Apple optimizing their specific modes, everything from portraits on stills to cinematic on video. Like, I was 100% honest and I said that cinematic on my iPhone 13 Pro Max looks like trash. I have no problem admitting it. Why would I not? It's not even something I really use a lot. Just so happens though that Apple has actually kept on improving that mode, and while Samsung might have been really working on improving edge detection year over year, they have not actually worked on improving like the core physics aspect of how bokeh looks. Everything looks equally just washed out here. On the iPhone, this looks like there's a grading, like there's a fall off here. Some is a little more sharp, it's a little closer to the sensor. Some is a little less sharp. Is it as natural as a real camera? No. But is it leagues and light years ahead of what Samsung is doing? Absolutely.
With my hair, I mean, I have gray hair, so it is a bit of a challenge. But overall, the colors were better on the iPhone. You can also edit where you want to focus after the fact on the iPhone. This is something that you can't do on the S23 Ultra. And
which to me like makes those modes similarly incomparable to how I consider like the new portrait mode an absolutely like killer feature, and similarly how I consider like 5x far more usable than that mix of 3x and 10x. As I've said before, if Samsung had a very high quality like 4x sensor, or if just they made the 3x like far better, then I think Samsung would actually take that there. But there's a lot of smarter decisions here that Apple has made, and there's some optimizations like long-term improvements that Apple has enacted. Well, for Samsung, cinematic mode clearly was just a way to like match whatever Apple is doing. I don't even remember what it's called there.
A new feature that we've got on the iPhone this year is continuous zoom in cinematic mode. This is something that you can't do in the S23 Ultra. You are just fixed. For autofocus in good light, I think both pretty good, but I really wanted to put them through the paces, right? So I used a black card in a low light, which is very difficult. But the iPhone had no problems with it whatsoever. The S23
LiDAR
Ultra
probably
was
helps a little
struggling, as you
here.
can see. And that is because the iPhone 15 Pro Max has a LiDAR scanner. It doesn't have to rely on the light in the scene. And finally, audio. I'll let you guys have a listen.
Audio test on the iPhone 15 Pro Max and now the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra.
They have a very different audio profile almost. The video. Oh, by the way, like, look at that image though. Like, look at that video. Look at how much blown out everything is on the Samsung. Look, like this. If I had shown you this video from a year ago, well, video was always better on the iPhone, but this will translate also to better HDR and stills. If you had shown me this still a year ago, I would have said, yeah, this like the iPhone image is in actuality the Samsung image, and the Samsung image is in actuality the iPhone image, with the core idea being that iPhone sometimes struggles with HDR. Now apparently not.
Let me know which one you think was better, but in my opinion, I think both were very good, but I'd say that the S23 Ultra does have overall better noise cancellation. I could hear less of...
Yes, in this specific example. However, noise cancellation is like, can you tune it? Like the iPhone offers you like that crazy new cancellation mode. I also don't like it. It was more aggressive on the Galaxy. The actual audio quality was not better. Though I would say they're both really good for smartphones. So I'll not get hung up here. It's good on both.
the background noise. That's what I think anyway. What do you guys think? Drop me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. In terms of my conclusions, I think both of these have excellent cameras overall, both for images and video. The S23 Ultra obviously has that better extended zoom. It has better portraits in low light, better macro shots in my opinion, as well as the overall better ultra-wide camera. Again, that ultra-wide makes me, like, I've agreed with him in terms of low light, with the ultra-wide in terms of good lighting conditions. I have no idea what night side setting he is using for the ultra-wide. If he's using it where it's capturing like something for 2 seconds while the Samsung is taking 4 seconds, then this is completely invalid. Yeah, so again, also both of those images look like trash. The iPhone, I would say, is so consistent, and it's also very versatile because now you have all of these different focal lengths and lenses that you can use. You can also shoot at 24 megapixels by default. You can control the depth of images after you take them, which is amazing. It has better low light performance from the primary as well as the telephoto camera. And I sound like a broken record, but I still think the iPhone has the best video on any smartphone overall. If you want to see my unboxing...
I think the iPhone takes both crowns here. Maybe we do need like a pixel comparison at some point, but in my opinion the iPhone takes both the stills crown. If the Galaxy had it over the Pixel prior, then the iPhone now has it. If the Pixel maybe won against the Samsung, I still do think that the HDR improvements are significant enough, considering like how it probably scales over the 14 Pro, that it would likely also win against the Pixel 7. Maybe the Pixel 8 would then win again. And in video, I don't think there's like anything coming out in the next 12 months that will be the iPhone. And then next year the iPhone gets a larger sensor, while the Samsung does pretty much not. it will get like a slightly more modern main sensor. So that's pretty fascinating in that regard. That the iPhone might actually be really technologically superior next year, unless Samsung offers variable zoom, which would lead to a much better experience for any zoom thing. And I don't know if anything will change about the ultra wide for either phone next year. That will be interesting to see.
An initial 72-hour experience with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I've covered that in the video here. And if you want to see my full review of the S23 Ultra, you can see that here. Don't forget, I am working on a very detailed comparison between the S23 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
I'll probably check that out.
Looking at all of the other things as well as the cameras. If you don't want to miss that, then do subscribe and hit that bell icon. I hope you...
Okay, this allows me now to move in very smoothly towards the next video without any kind of segue, but I do want to get this a little quicker behind me, even though it is actually slightly longer. This is a really quality breakdown of iPhone's image capabilities in general. It is not a comparative review, so it's almost exists in like its own bubble, and it's arguably done by people that are way more knowledgeable about photography and videography than any other YouTube reviewer who's mostly focused on smartphones. Well, they're not focused on smartphones. There are other camera reviewers as well, but I would trust those two guys over almost anyone in the industry.
And today we are reviewing the iPhone 15
Man, that's loud.
Pro and 15 Pro Max specifically. We've got a beautiful location. We're out here in San Jose. We're just gonna be exploring this beautiful city and all it has to offer. So you're gonna see a whole bunch of locations as we go on our little tour of this gorgeous city. Let's get to it. Okay, so I think it's very important to point out that I'm going to be approaching today's review really from the standpoint as a photographer and Jordan from the standpoint as a videographer. And so because of that, we're not testing the entire phone's features. We're really focusing on, in my case, the 3-year cameras, and in Jordan's case, all the video capabilities that the iPhone 15 Pro has to offer. I also want to point out, I'm going to be shooting the iPhone 15 Pro Max predominantly today, and Jordan's going to be shooting on an iPhone 15 Pro like he is right now. You definitely want to pay attention as he's changing scenes to the text below, because he will say whether he's shooting standard profiles, HDR, ProRes. We're going to test everything today. And now this is going to be the first video we've done in HDR output, so if you have an HDR display, I would absolutely watch this video on that HDR display. If not, it's still going
I actually don't know how that works through OBS with HDR. Kind of thing it's not. It looked really good on my iPad Pro. This is where I watched most of the video. So I will not be doing any HDR impressions based on this. What I can say is that nothing comes close to how the iPhone actually handles HDR, both in photos and videos. It's something that I believe is often lost. When you look at the actual image, I think the iPhone wins slightly against like HDR on any Android. But when it comes to videos, man, my God, there's absolutely no comparison. Like, oh, just so good. Some of those images actually show like still shadows to be decently dark. However, I would probably argue that the shadows likely were pretty dark there, because like it's such like thick greens here that they are probably covering up the sun pretty intensively. Ultrawide still looks decent. Again, I've always been critical of the ultrawide being so far behind the image quality of the main sensor, but it is what it is.
Okay, so let's talk about the 3 rear cameras that we have on the iPhone 15 Pro, and we'll also talk about what we have on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So the main camera, your primary tool. So we have a 24mm full frame equivalent. We're getting f1.78 as our aperture, 2.44 micron pixel density pitch when binned, This is exactly the same size, sensor, and lens assembly that we're getting on the iPhone 14 Pro.
That's true.
If it is changed in any way, it is minor. Now when it comes to the ultra-wide lens, we have a 13mm full-frame equivalent f2.2, and this again is basically the exact same specifications we find on the iPhone 14 Pro. And when it comes to the telephoto lens, we have a 77mm full-frame equivalent f2.8 on the iPhone 15 Pro. Specification-wise, again, it's the exact same thing as the iPhone 14 Pro. Apple does say that there are new coatings on these lenses, you know, minor changes, but essentially, the long story short, we have the exact same lens assemblies from the iPhone 14 Pro as we do on the 15 Pro. Okay, but we do have one big change when it comes to lenses, and that's on the iPhone 15 Pro Max model specifically.
All thus far is completely true, so there isn't much to comment. I've also repeatedly commented on the exact specs.
Frame equivalent lens f2.8 that actually Jordan is shooting with right now. So yes, you do have to get the top of the line model, but it might actually be worth the extra price. Okay, so we've talked about focal lengths. Now let's talk about resolution.
Also, as I've looked at yesterday, the 15 Pro Max seems to have a slightly larger telephoto camera than, or its tetra prism sensor than the 3x telephoto assembly does on the regular Pro, which to me almost surprised me. I don't know why. I didn't quite perceive it that way during the presentation.
The 13mm camera, the 77mm camera, and the new 120mm camera, all 12 megapixels. The main camera, of course, is a 48 megapixel quad Bayer sensor, just like we saw in the iPhone 14 Pro. But there is an interesting difference here now. So before, unless you were shooting Apple Pro RAW files at 48 megapixels, you were getting 12 megapixel output out of the main camera. Now what we're getting out of the main camera is actually an option to shoot 24 megapixels. And Apple's doing something interesting to get this 24 megapixel resolution. So first off, they're still doing their smart HDR combining of multiple photos at 12 megapixel output, but then they're also combining that with a 48 megapixel resolution shot, and that's how they're getting this 24 megapixel output. The other thing I want to mention too is we don't just have to shoot Apple Pro RAW, we can also now shoot 48 megapixel HEIF files, however you want to say it. So just like
yeah, I had that problem as well. Again, everything he's saying right now is very correct. The images and videos they're taking are extremely beautiful. It's when he gets, obviously, and the other guy, I don't remember their names, I'm sorry, when they get into detail, when I'll be mostly commenting.
This beautiful tree, you could say that Apple's older lenses are being propped up by their brand new A17 processor. Okay, now we got a pretty hot day out here, but it's interesting, the camera's getting roasty toasty. I think Jordan was saying his is getting a little hot there to hold too. And I got a brief flash, like iPhone camera needs to cool down, but that went away, so I can...
Yeah, that will happen sometimes with extremely demanding recording, yeah.
Still shoot. Okay, so you may know this about me already, but I'm not an Apple iPhone user.
That cinematic mode looks dope. That's one of the best cinematic modes I've seen. Probably because it's really well stabilized.
Never owned one. This is my first time actually shooting seriously on one. And one thing I know a lot of the Apple...
Yeah, the other guy is like the Apple guy. He has like an iMac and stuff like that. He does not use Apple technology by default.
iPhone users have is this little switch here, and this switch, I guess, puts your phone into silent mode, do not disturb, I don't know, you can turn off notifications, that kind of thing, shut down the ringer. Anyway.
And apparently he's no OnePlus user.
That's now not here anymore. Instead, we've got this little button, and this is customizable. Now, you can still use this as your silent button, but you can also now customize it to do many different things. And as a photographer, I really like the fact that I can set it up to start and stop video recording. I can use it to just hold down and press and bring up my camera module immediately. I'm using that a lot today. And then I can even take pictures with that same button after I've done that. And I'm finding it really handy in a street photography situation. This does shave off just a little bit of time, and when you're shooting on the street like this, that's absolutely invaluable. So good, Jordan. Yes. Praise me.
This cinematic mode looks incredible. I might have to start using cinematic mode. This is why I do love reviews like this that aren't comparative. They aren't designed to like attract fanboys of either side. It's just about showing the capabilities and fairly assessing them.
All right, so for this next talk, we tried to find a statue of an apple. We couldn't. The best we could do here is, I think it's an apricot or a nectarine or a peach or something like that. But anyways,
yeah,
Jordan clearly has an obsession.
I cannot differentiate between those things either. I am training to be a doctor, not a biologist.
With butt cracks and butt crack shaped objects. So what I want to talk about,
I have more experience with that in a professional sense.
Pro or Pro Max, you've probably seen the mention of 7 cameras. Now you're going to have your 24mm main camera, you're going to now have a new 28mm equivalent and 35mm equivalent. You're going to have a 48mm 2x crop, and then you're going to have your telephoto, whether that's the 77mm or the 120mm, depending on whether you get the Pro or the Pro Max. So, you know, every time that we do these videos, I know they always seem very well edited and polished because Jordan does a very good job, but
Chris.
You're welcome. But there's always what's going on in the background, and it's always a struggle. I mean,
I'm so impressed by the video capture. Yes, sometimes you will see, like, when you look out of the window, it's blown out. Of course it is, because this will also happen with, like, most cameras, because there's only so much that a camera can focus on, basically, simultaneously. However, his face looks great. Like, the view out of the front window looks fantastic. Like, this looks incredible. The detail on his shirt is really well maintained. Even there's some detail on, like, the steering wheel on the car. This is a really good edge-to-edge quality image. Like, you can see, like, either the leather material or whatever it actually is from the seat, so it doesn't even, it clearly didn't just use some kind of algorithm to recognize his face and only make him look good. The overall image looks good.
That's just life. And our struggle today, we've been trying to upload our podcast, and the hotel they're staying at,
that
really
podcast
spotty.
room,
So,
to
we
die
went to
for.
Japanese garden. It was lovely this morning, but they just don't have Wi-Fi, and then we're still trying to upload this. We went back to the hotel. It hasn't finished. So then we go to Santana Row, we have a nice lunch, we're using their Wi-Fi, it's spotty as well. We just can't get this video uploaded, so now we find ourselves in a parking lot in San Jose somewhere, I'm not sure where we are, at a public library, and Jaren's inside getting this episode uploaded with the free Wi-Fi at the library. So this is what we deal with. So Jordan and I are sitting in the car, and I thought, why don't we talk about a handling issue here that I'm having on the iPhone 15. One thing I'm finding,
I almost feel like XQC whenever I watch a video that I really like, that I really want to still have some power even through my reaction stream, and I don't react that much to it, and I feel like I'm doing a react harder thing, right, where I'm not actually doing enough reaction. But for one, a lot of it was just like vibes based right now. It was about showing the images. I've commented where I thought that those images looked specifically very pretty. I apologize for some stutters in my stream. It really seems to, and it shows like very good internet quality, and then it drops by half. Like, something is wrong, I think, with like my general YouTube connection here. Regardless, he will mention a handling issue that I don't fully agree with.
A little bit funny that I'm using quite a bit is the color profiles, and I think a lot of users maybe don't use this. And I know you're about to
yes. This is the other issue. Yeah, this I actually agree with. I misremembered it. He is mentioning photographic styles and the way they're integrated into the camera app, where it sometimes it takes a little too long to go back to a photographic style that you like. I kind of would like almost a 2 or 3 photographic style shortcut that you could always access without going into any specific deeper settings in the app. Yeah, I fully agree with that. I thought this was him mentioning like the position of the action button, where again I don't fully disagree, but I would bring up some of the like mute switch history and why Apple couldn't just put it into a different place without redesigning a lot of the iPhone. But I don't even know, did he bring that up as well? Because I remember that being brought up in like the videos I reacted to yesterday.
Get over it, but I have to go down here to the sub menu, push that, then I can choose all my different color things: dramatic, warm, mono, silver tone, and I'm liking the black and white options. So when I go in there,
it's really good mono,
I get
by the
this
way.
lovely little reminder up here, these 3 rings, and that's great because I can just very easily touch it and go to something else. That seems great. The only thing I'm finding strange is if I go back to original and kick out, that disappears. And that just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I
People
agree
are
with
saving
that.
That much real estate up there. Is there a way to make it stay on permanently?
I don't
You
know.
tell me.
Neither do
The
I.
only thing I can find out is never go back to the original color setting. Go to Vivid or something, and then it basically stays up there all the time. I don't know. Is that weird?
Yes. I actually think this is why it is this way. It's because Apple wants you to stay at one specific thing if this is the one you prefer. Let's say you did like a really fine adjustment where the image just looks 5%, I know percentage is not the greatest way, but like it looks like 5% cooler than the native image, and you basically always like it because it makes it look a little more pixelish, right? So the idea is that you basically always stay in that mode. Is it a super smart solution for everything? I don't know. I do agree with him that this is a small but still meaningful handling issue.
Is that just me?
It's kind of annoying.
All right, so the next stop on our little road trip journey here through San Jose is Japantown. It's pretty quiet though, but it does give us an opportunity to talk about now.
Oh, they're in San Jose.
One thing I really wanted
I
to
thought for a
touch
second
on
they
is
went to
the
Japan.
new 120mm lens in this.
Because I know they're from Canada, so yeah, San Jose is less surprising than Japan.
What's the depth of field going to be like? You know, I mean, it's an f2.8 lens, but it's also a very small sensor. So
Very small,
are we
yeah.
gonna get nice shallow depth of field considering that telephoto range? Well, have a look at this shot here. I mean, you are getting a fairly shallow depth of field, but it's still not giving you that really soft background that just goes into blur. So what you're gonna have to do here, I think, is still in a lot of cases use Apple's portrait mode to artificially
Ooh,
give
that looks
shallow
really
depth of field.
good.
Now in the past, I've been a little bit wary of
By the way,
using-
the way that lights react to like a shallow depth of field change and stuff like that, I know it's like basically just being stretched out indirectly, but I've always find this looks way better. All kind of like portrait tuning looks way better with how iPhone handle it than Androids. What I usually find with high-end Androids phone is that they have a very good default portrait, but then the way they adjust it, because they do not have this gradual fall off, or at least I don't know if they have it. It doesn't look like they do. This makes it like this different. Like this makes the difference to me between like, oh, I actually want to go back to my photos and readjust portrait a little bit, even if it's just by a little bit. While with Android, I'm like, okay, I'll just rely on whatever you put out.
This portrait mode because it can look quite artificial, especially around the hair and shoulders. It was better on the iPhone 14 Pro series, but actually on the iPhone 15 Pro here, it's actually even better. It is improved. It's still not perfect. If you look hard for it, you can.
I kind of think, I know, like I believe me, guys, I'm not happy that Apple is like reusing most sensors here and stuff like that, but I kind of believe that reusing the sensors is a big part for why Smart HDR5 is working as well as it currently does. I believe if we had gotten much larger sensors, we would now be in a 2 to 3 month period where Apple keeps pushing out small updates that improve Smart HDR5. Like the knowledge that Apple has of those specific sensors, lens arrangements, like even comparing like the telephoto 5x versus 3x, it's not as earth-shakingly different as going to a 10x sensor. Like the sensors are pretty similar in size, the apertures are pretty similar once you normalize for the different camera assembly. So to me, this is like really like it's basically like a counterpoint to always changing sensors, to how sometimes like Xiaomi will like just always try to make the main sensor a little larger, but then year after year you see the same color science problems and stuff like that, and edge-to-edge sharpness is not always perfect. Like look at MKBHD's video reviewing, I think it was like the Xiaomi 12 Ultra or something, and the 13 Ultra did not fix any of those issues. So yeah, I will take using the same sensor. What I would prefer is for Apple to, well, sometimes they will be on a 3-year cycle with main sensors. Actually, when the sensors were smaller, they had several years in a row where sometimes they would be the same size. But Yeah, right now I actually would prefer for like a 2-year cycle to maybe sometimes 3-year cycle, where they use the same sensors, or almost the same sensors, but then really keep updating the HDR technology, thanks to their better understanding now of how those sensors behave, how the lenses behave, and stuff like that.
See some issues, but honestly, I don't think that most users are even going to mind, and it was quite seamless. But here's the best part, because on the iPhone 15s we have a brand new feature now. You don't have to commit to going to portrait mode to create those depth maps and then that artificial bokeh. What you can actually do now is just take a picture, and if you see this little F symbol at the bottom, you can see it there. That first off tells you that the camera is detecting portraits and then actually saving depth maps automatically, even if you're not in portrait mode. And what's great now is that I can choose after the fact of taking the picture whether I want to actually apply the portrait effect or not. Now previously, if I shot in portrait mode, I could choose not to use the portrait mode afterwards. But here, I don't have to make any of those choices. If I take a picture and at any later date it's got a portrait detection in there, either pets or people, I can then just say, oh yeah, I would actually prefer to have a softer background. Go in afterwards into editing and choose that. I can also choose between different areas that I want to have in focus. So this is just nice. It just means that I don't have to really worry about, oh, was I in portrait mode? I can simply just take shots and then decide later. And
yeah, it's for one, it's a very good explanation, but the other point is the way they've shown it is actually really cool, because I think it alleviates maybe some of the fear some people will have. Well, what if one thing is a little bit in motion? Like the depth data is still correct, right? Unless that thing is moving a lot through the image. And basically like confusing the sensor here. Yeah, I think it works really well. What they've shown.
I really like that convenience. Well,
also the colors are great, and now I understand why it's manual graded log.
almost forgot. So this 120mm lens does have a pretty advanced stabilizer.
Which, by the way, I think I've mentioned it last video. Final Cut Pro on iPad and on Mac has been upgraded to support the log profile from the iPhone, with also like easy manual grading options.
There's now 3 axes, up, down, left, right, and then forward, back, which to me is really more autofocusing than stabilization. But I will say I haven't had any problems hand holding. No,
it is stabilization. Part of that has to do with like, how do I say it? Well, it's because it's not like a stills or video focus thing. It's obviously designed to focus on all of it. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess I get his point. Like, if it moves around to really compensate for like specific stuff, for like specific movements, it's more like autofocus than raw stabilization. But it is still, isn't it, like technically would still be image stabilization by most definition. So again, I'm not an expert here. It's just a semantics thing. It's not that either one of us here would like aggressively defend their position.
Lens, but the true test, how's this for a segue, would actually be video. So let's go over to Jordan now and talk about video capabilities on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max.
All right, so because we've got a really contrasty scene right now, we've switched over to recording in the ProRes log format that I was really excited about. I mean, we've seen third-party companies offering their version of like a log profile for iPhone, but this is a first-party solution, so it's going to take advantage of all the dynamic range that this sensor is actually capturing. My biggest issue with exposing log is there's absolutely no built-in LUT for it, so you're going to be looking at a gray, ungraded image instead of what it's going to look.
Very pro-level criticism, but then again, it is a pro-level feature. As far as I understand, Filmic Pro has already been updated specifically for this.
After you apply some grading to it. But the other big limitation is there's no kind of metering controls on this, and log can be very difficult to expose correctly, so I am trusting Apple's auto exposure to do a good job. Now this is definitely
you should.
Help in
it's a smartphone,
but we might still run into situations where your highlights are clipping and things like that, but this is a great creative option to have. My biggest concern is it's only available when we're recording ProRes. This is something they didn't really highlight in the keynote presentation, so if you want to
I don't have a problem with that. Now, for one, I obviously won't be using a lot of ProRes or log, but I can understand Apple's desire if they push log onto like prosumers and pros, that they would want for it to be presented in the best possible way in ProRes, which obviously captures, which it saves more detail than an H.265 video.
Shoot those nice small H.265 files, you're out of luck. You've got to deal with the default profiles for those. But you can record those giant ProRes files right into your phone if you've got enough capacity. But a huge upgrade is we can now use the USB-C port on these and output it right to an SSD. But what Apple didn't mention is it doesn't have to be an SSD. You can also send it out to a card reader with solid.
Also, just a small shout out to people like Linus who will complain that Apple is like giving early access to only people who like them or who are super relevant, or sometimes to people who aren't relevant but are really like butt lickers and stuff like that. Where do those guys fall into that spectrum? Because they got early access and what, like, they don't like kiss up to Apple whatsoever. They're not even smartphone reviewers. I know that people at Apple internally really like DP review, so it's actually like, maybe it's like really just favorable because they know those guys are quality reviewers. But yeah, this idea that like Apple chosen media, I'm sorry Linus, you don't get chosen because your reviews are late when it comes to smartphones. You choose weird people to review them often, not even the people who use iPhones the most in your team, and then you yourself present it in a hot take-ish way where the editing is highly skewed towards negative takes, even if the overall video might have a positive vibe, right? You just cut it in a way where the negative comes up front and then some in the end, so that people who don't watch the entire video are actually more like negatively tuned, which would apply to your PCMR guys. They probably aren't watching a full 15-minute iPhone focus video, but people who actually want to know something, well, to them your video might be okay, but there are so much better channels. So yeah, shut up.
State memory. So my buddy Alex Mitchell.
And with Linus, I of course mean Linus Sebastian from Linus Media Group and Linus Tech Tips.
Mitchell was like, can we just shoot these giant files to a CF Express card? And I tested it, and absolutely you can. Straight to a card reader, CF Express, and that's fast enough you'll be able to record 4K 60 HDR ProRes right to the card. This is a great workaround if you don't want to fill up your phone. But what's absolutely bizarre is you can only output ProRes files to those SSDs. If you want to output the smaller files and just have them directly recorded to an SSD or a memory card, it's not going to give you that capability. And one thing Apple talked about quite a bit is...
Oh, really? Oh, that sucks. Why is that, Apple? Maybe they really were afraid people wouldn't have enough storage for ProRes and didn't bother to enable it for other files? Yeah, that's weird.
The ability to smoothly move through all of your different focal ranges, and on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, that means from 13 mils up to 120 millimeters. But what we're finding here, it moves from the 0.5 lens all the way through your normal lenses quite effectively. But when it moves over to that 5x lens, there's kind of a parallax snap that occurs, which looks very artificial, very disjointed. So I would use this if I was...
I've talked about that in iJustine's video, where she said that like the transition was super smooth, and I disagreed. So I have no problem criticizing Apple when deserved.
Smaller adjustments like a tiny zoom in the middle of a shot for a bit more cinematic effect. But what I really wish this gave you the ability to do is, first of all, not have that parallax issue, but also just a button that you could push to make it zoom out or zoom in. The current kind of jog dial setup they have makes it really easy to accidentally screw up your zoom and wind up having to do it over again, because I think we're on like our 10th take right now. So
okay.
Sadly, this does mark the end of
I understand being a little
San
pissed
Jose,
off about
we're
that.
really looking forward to getting back to Calgary. I'm going to take a look at the video files through Final Cut. Chris is going to run the photos through Lightroom and really analyze the image quality from the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. But what's also cool is Apple was good enough to send these phones back to Canada so we can run some more tests there from a much more...
You see, you do quality stuff, Apple will actually accommodate you. You see?
I don't know, cold, less inviting climate.
All right, we're back in Calgary, Alberta. I know Jordan said we were going to be returning to yucky old cold Canada, but it turns out we got a gorgeous summer here and it's just lovely. So we've taken some more samples, we've taken a look at the stuff that we shot back in San Jose, and I think we've been able to evaluate things well enough that we can now give you our final thoughts on the image quality on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max when it comes to stills and video. Okay, so let's start things off with stills, talking about just the kind of image files we can take on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. So you have your 48 megapixel Apple Pro RAW files. As usual, we've seen this before, and this gives you tons of detail, great sharpness, but also the room to push and pull in post like you would with any photographic RAW file. And so I do like that we see the return of that. One thing that we do have new though on the 15 Pro and Pro Max is now 48 megapixel HEIF files. Now, the benefit here, you're still getting that excellent detail and
great of them to cover the formats. They obviously aren't making any mistakes in how they cover them. I would kind of understand almost if they did, because it's probably like not their like direct area of expertise. I mean, obviously they cover cameras and different video and file and image files, but yeah, they're 100% fluid. They're really high recommendation for the PetaPixel channel and everything they do basically.
Sharpness, you still have some room to push and pull, and the HEIF files do record an extended dynamic range, so they do capture quite a bit of light and dark at the same time, but drastically smaller file sizes. I mean, that's kind of the key here. So if you really want that sharpness and detail, but you don't want the file size of a full RAW, this
88, wow, that is really large at this point. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, a capture either 24 or 48. I don't think 12 is a worthwhile trade-off. I think some people were like saying that like, oh, 24 is like 3 megabytes and 12 would be like 2 megabytes or something like that. 48 megapixel HEIF kind of looks like the best compromise. Though I will have a 1 terabyte phone. What will I capture? It's hard to actually tell the difference here because probably they aren't like 100% like for like. Like I actually see a little bit more detail, I would argue, in the 48 megapixel HEIF, but it's really hard to tell.
This is a nice option. But one thing to remember, those 48 megapixel RAW files, they're not going to take full advantage of HDR displays unless you push and pull them afterwards to do so. This is why I think the majority of iPhone users are really going to enjoy the 24 megapixel file format, because here, right out of camera, you're getting HDR photos, you're still getting a great amount of detail, much improved over the other 12 megapixel files, and so I think a lot of people are really going to go this way instead. For me personally, as a photographer, I think this is how I'd approach it. I'd probably use 48 megapixel HEIF files the least, to be honest.
Yeah, right. Apple offered their official LUT, yeah, for log.
That 24 megapixel file when I just want to have nice looking images right out of the box, or I'm going to go to the 48 megapixel Apple Pro RAW as normal and then really be able to push and pull to my heart's content. But you know, all these improvements we've talked about so far with resolution largely have to do with the main camera. Even the 28 and 35 millimeter lenses, which we would say are effectively digital crops. But keep in mind that the 28 mm and 35 millimeter lenses are actually incorporating a 48 megapixel shot. So you're getting that same boost to the detail. You're getting the 24 megapixel file, and the image quality was good. So really, as skeptical I was at the start, I really just consider it now to give you 3 extra lenses. If you want that 24 millimeter field of view, great. If you want 28 or 35, great. You can even set that to be the default for the camera when you turn it on. I don't know why you'd want 35, you know I don't like those, but overall I actually was really pleased with the image quality out of our artificial lenses. You know, having this new 24 megapixel file size actually really does show what you were missing with the 12 megapixel pictures, but on the iPhone 15 there's still some situations where you're shooting 12 megapixels. So now that we
this is all quality stuff, like quality comparisons. It's not like I can really call out anything. Nothing is also like really surprising, given we are talking about a smartphone. So the sensor size itself will be a limitation in some ways to like real camera quality sometimes. And they mentioned everything from like file size constraints, other potential issues. There really is nothing more to add. I kind of wish that people would maybe ask guys like this to sometimes advise them on like their smartphone reviews. Like I think this would be like, instead of Linus building like his garbage lab for testing, like look, those guys don't have a lab. You know what they do? They have knowledge, they have understanding of context, and they have a little bit of flair where they want to still show you like actual pretty pictures. I hate, like, you know, the standardized, there's like a mannequin head, there's like a color like circle and stuff like that, and you capture this white image relatively and then you zoom in, right? That's perfect for great reviews, for like highly technical reviews. But I hate it when people only do that, when they have no understanding of capturing in natural light, when they have no understanding of how even different modes inside the smartphone will change depending on the light around them, the specific color signs that needs to be applied in something that might not be a primarily white room with highly contrasty colors in between. What happens if you have a very gradual color palette, like between the greens of a field and the greens of trees? How does it handle a sky that goes from darker blue as you move farther away to a lighter blue as it gets closer to the earth, right? Those are all things that need to be tested every generation, because especially in comparison to regular cameras, smartphones are so fickle with their algorithms, and so much more stuff is like based on really abstract AI at this point, as those companies learn from like gigantic data sets and feed them into their phones or processors in general. So I really like that they have gone over to doing those reviews regularly. Like I remember being really happy to see the iPhone 14 Pro review, and I'm happy that they're basically keeping it up and year over year getting better in terms of smartphone camera reviews.
I have this 24 megapixel mode on the main camera. I can't really think of a situation where I'd want to go back down to the older 12 megapixel format.
Neither would I.
You do notice there then the over sharpening a little bit, the over processed kind of look to it, some of the lack of detail, and of course you also notice this on the other cameras, the ultra wide and the two tellies, because you're again at 12 megapixels. Even when you go into night mode, although it is improved and you do get a nice range of tones, maybe a wider range of tones than you would get if you processed a 48 megapixel HEIF or RAW file format, you still notice that we're losing a lot of detail, not a lot of noise, but
yeah, I assume this will be updated next year. I assume that maybe Apple will use like new sensors across the board, maybe to give you 48 megapixel for basically every 48 megapixel for like the 5x telephoto would kind of be a huge deal, right? Because that would allow you to do like lossless 10x. Provided that the camera assembly can even fit the sensor as large currently into it. But with how the mirrors work, I really don't see where the limitation would ultimately lie. The aperture probably would still not be able to be as big as obviously on the main sensor, but you can make the sensor easily another 20-30% larger. Maybe use like the 48 megapixel stacked sensor from the regular iPhone 15, which is a little smaller than the 48 megapixel in the new ones. And then you use like a 48 megapixel one that is now 10-15% larger than the 48 megapixel in the 15 Pro and the 15 Pro Max for the main sensor. That would actually be a really nice discrepancy here to cover.
Certainly a loss of detail, and so even in those situations I might be tempted to just go with the 48 megapixel file and try to work it to keep that detail that's inherent there. So most of the improvements to photo image quality are based on the new A17 processor and the new modes, but let's see if that also rings true for Jordan when he talks about the video image quality.
So when it comes to image quality, I feel like iPhones are kind of batting back and forth with other people like Google when it comes to photographic image quality. But for the longest time, the consensus among me and everyone who used this is the iPhones have the best video. But that doesn't mean they didn't have problems. I mean, they were notorious when you're shooting in a high contrast scene for something I affectionately call wax face, where the face loses all detail.
Yeah, that's unfortunately pretty universal for smartphones. Apple has a very specific look that sometimes other cameras don't have. I would say they still are pretty like aggressive in trying to make the face still look good, but then it really doesn't. And the way he covers it is like really perfect. It really outlines what has changed and stuff like
turns
that.
just very monochromatic, and it looks terrible, and you can't fix it in post. Now, I'm not going to say I never ran into this issue, but it's much less prevalent now with the iPhone 15 Pro. And what's really interesting is when it happened in a very high contrast situation, I was able to get Chris looking sort of like a human being again in post, as opposed to some horrifying monster, which was the case before. But the big news now is that we've now got this new log profile, and there were definitely some usability issues that I mentioned before, but the big thing that really surprised me is that the quality on this, if you're shooting in good light like we are now, is absolutely fantastic. I found it extremely easy to hand grade.
Yeah, because video capturing is process intensive, this is the one thing that Apple can really use, like leverage their processor for, to compete with things that usually you would not be able to compete with. You mean you know, like large cameras with much larger sensors, much better lenses and stuff like that. But because you won't have the same processing power behind it, Apple can overcome a lot of the distance here, and they've been doing that for years. Where I would still obviously for professional videography use a professional camera. It just so happens, and now I'm back to using it just so happens, but the iPhone has kept up a relentless pace to improve its video capture capability, to the point where I would say that the gap might have shrunk with Android because it was really huge, but it still is at around 2 generations.
I was able to make it look really good very easily. But the thing to remember is Apple can do a ton of computational tricks to improve low light performance in photography by stacking images. They don't have nearly that flexibility when you're recording video. So if you're planning to shoot indoors, especially in like real low light, the image quality is going to look like, let's be honest, it's going to look bad. That is
Yes, that is 100% true. This is just a raw limitation of sensor size and stuff like that. It sucks, of course, to anybody who is a smartphone enthusiast and really would like to do something with a smartphone that looks kind of professional in the area of videography, but it's not a big deal. It still is a smartphone, and I would argue it is more usable indoors because you're much more likely to actually use it indoors because you always have it with you.
still smartphone's Achilles heel. So when I would really like to use this is in good light like we've got now, even in high contrast situations. Now that I've got log, I wouldn't worry about that at all. But just be aware, if you're going to go inside or out at night, your video quality is going to be bad. Okay, so what about cinematic mode, which I was not a huge fan of back on the iPhone 13 Pro. It just looked incredibly fake, like you had some bad cutouts in it and a lot of depth map errors. Well, I think because we've got a better processor on these cameras, it is actually quite a bit better than what we saw before, less of that cutout effect. But looking at my footage on a 4K display, I was definitely still seeing lots of depth map errors, a lot of weirdness in it. And I don't think this is going to be a problem if you're just playing it back on the phone, throwing it on social media, but for me personally, I think I'm just going to leave cinematic mode off, especially because if you're using the main...
I think the inconsistency is my main issue, and while Apple probably created the most the most easy to use editing software for it, I still don't like working with how you edit cinematic mode. Maybe if one day I can scream at Siri to change foreground, change background, a little more, a little less, maybe then. And I know I can turn it off basically afterwards. It's just so I don't want to say it just so happens, but it's simply that it just requires more work from me. I would rather rely, as he either said or will say, because now time runs in circles for me. I don't remember if he already said it or I only remember it from watching it yesterday. I would rather rely on the natural blur from the main sensor.
camera, you can get sort of shallow depth of field just optically.
Okay, he was about to say it. So time really is a flat circle for me right now.
That I've used for video, but there's still room for improvement. What's nice is Apple is being quite flexible about actually letting that happen. I was very worried when Apple announced their new log format that if you wanted the most dynamic range from this camera, you would have to shoot it with their default video camera app. But they're keeping the API open, so third-party app developers are going to be able to take advantage of the beautiful log image here, but give us stuff that we absolutely need, like some...
It's, by the way, I just want to say it's insane. I just see that OBS is telling me it dropped 14.9% of my frames. I've never had a video behave as poorly as this one does. I have no, I'm not even streaming during a high usage time, right? Well, maybe after 5 p.m. people started to come home. But yeah, maybe it has a little to do with that I'm using more data now that I'm doing CPU encoding rather than like the rather than using the engine. But that's not how it's supposed to work. Again, I'm not quite sure if OBS has like its own, like, regardless of overhead, OBS uses 21% of my CPU. I have the power to run it on the CPU. There's no problem here. It doesn't well, it has turned on the fans, but I cannot even hear them through like those thin earbuds.
Metering tools or a preview LUT built into those applications. I can't wait to start shooting video with some of the other third-party video recording tools out there. So as long as you're willing to spring for some third-party apps, I would fully suspect that we're going to get this beautiful image quality with a ton of great usable video tools, and that's going to make this a very powerful video platform.
Okay, so here's my final thoughts, especially being someone who's never used an iPhone for photography before. I mean, first off, I think Apple has this balancing act that they've always had to deal with, and that is that the vast majority of their users just want things to be simple, to work out of the camera and be visually pleasing. And so I think things like the 24 megapixel mode are really going to be a good hit there. And then if you're wanting to be more discerning, maybe play with your files a little bit more, get into RAW files, I think Apple is still just going to do this thing where they rely on keeping the API open and letting third-party app developers create apps that can run your cameras in a more advanced way and give you more control. And I think that is pretty appropriate. And so then the other thought I have is that using the 15 Pro and Pro Max, I would personally rely quite heavily on the main camera. When I first heard of the 28 and 35mm lenses, I thought these are just gonna be nasty digital crops, but we're still getting that benefit of going up to 24 megapixels. And so actually I think that this opens up some neat lens ranges.
Yeah, I actually, they didn't quite do the same kind of comparison. Even if it just was one shot, I think Mr. Who's the Boss really showed that well, that those modes are not just zooms. I really like that he is deliberately like calling that out as a positive. He could have easily said what like SuperSaf said, which is that, yeah, I think it's a little bit of a stretch. Yeah, sure, it could be. Or did he say it's a little bit of a push or something? It doesn't matter. Regardless, I think their coverage is nigh on perfect.
Still gives you good image quality. I would rely on those quite a bit. With the telephoto, I mean, it's nice to have the new 120mm, absolutely. If you really want that format, that's why you go to the Pro Max. Otherwise, stick to the Pro and have the 77. But image quality-wise on both, they looked quite similar, and they're not that impressive. I mean, they look very similar to what we saw with the iPhone 14 Pro. So anyways, I really enjoyed using these phones for photography, and I feel like any of the complaints I had with portrait mode not being realistic enough, or having low resolution over processed shots, Apple's actually done quite a bit to improve that situation going forward. I know.
Really positive thing where you can really like, if you're a company like Apple, this is what you want to see, because what are they still saying? Oh well, low light video still sucks. Apple basically improve it. Like, oh, you improved portrait mode. Well, we've been asking for that over the years, so thank you for that. I know companies are companies, but you have to understand there are people working there. It means the world to them to get that kind of feedback. We try to often abstract away the creators of technology or art, even like video games, from the big corporations making them. the problem is we usually do that to concentrate our anger at the company, and that anger is often well deserved. The main problem here is when we almost completely forget to praise the devs when it's deserved, the engineers, the basically like even people who like fix your iPhone for all that matters, right? Like at the Genius Bar, that all comes together. There's a reason, for example, why Apple kept making more Apple stores and more Genius Bars. It isn't just that they kept selling well, it's that it legitimately added an experience point to people that then kept selling well, and they also knew they could attract a lot of high quality salespeople because people already liked their approach. The same goes for engineers. If you're an engineer at Apple and all you would hear ever is people like shitting on Apple in general for whatever reason, and you would be kind of understanding about it, right? If you're working at a company like Blizzard, for example, you could be doing the best work of your life, and you would still be kind of understanding that people probably don't like Blizzard that much. However, if you put out a really good product and you're waiting for reviews, and you don't see a single review that covers the shit that you really focused on, that you really did well objectively, right? A lot of people will sometimes put it in their head that they're geniuses, but some really do amazing work. And Apple fixed HDR. They put out a super innovative way to handle portraits. They gave us a different but somehow more useful extra zoom not extra zoom camera, different zoom camera on the Pro Max. Like, they improved image quality without changing the sensor. So this is just like a software effort throughout, like utilizing the better processor, but then building software that utilizes it well. So there's a lot here that comes together, and I feel like this is really honest, but still really, really nice. And I think being nice is very important when it's... This is why comparative reviews are interesting, but comparative reviews will always be somewhat negative. Comparative reviews will never be like, oh, this does it great, but this does it a little better, right? That's very rarely the case. Usually you will mainly focus on the positives on one and then its downsides, and then the positives on one and its downsides in comparison to the other. That has a highly negative connotation, even if it's just 20-25% of the overall review. Here, by not making it a comparative review, maybe from time to time comparing it to like the last generation, I wouldn't even mind if they put like some comparison shots from a 23 Ultra or a Pixel 7 Pro, or maybe even like a professional mirrorless camera or something like that. But the structure was perfect, the attitude, the vibes were great. Really, really big thumbs up from me in all regards here.
I know you guys have lots of questions, so leave those in the comments below. Let us know what you think. Please do subscribe to the socials and subscribe to the...
Yeah, highly recommend Chris and Jordan. Yeah, I always forget their names because I don't watch them as often as I used to. But that's not their fault, obviously. Yeah, so really happy with how the stream went. Just a small update for you guys. We added like over 30 subscribers during the stream, to the point we're now at 336. So I'll give you a massive heart for this. And a big thumbs up as well, with all the reactions that it can show. I don't know what like this does create balloons. I think you deserve those as well. And then I think this just does just one thumbs up, right? Yes. So now I went through the reaction. Does the tongue do anything? Doesn't look like it. So it just looks stupid for nothing. I don't know if I'll be doing any reaction videos today anymore. I might consider doing an A17 thing based on what MaxTech put out. And there's some like more in-depth reviews going on in like the Asian space. I don't know what language that person spoke. So so I cannot, like, I assume they're Asian. I'm really sorry if they're not. But like, is it Geeker Van or something like that? The channel they supposedly put out an A17 review. So there's still something that I might want to cover. It depends on how I feel. Obviously, I did say yesterday that I felt a little sick. I do feel better today, so this is why the stream is happening. But it's insane to me how many subscribers we have added. Like yesterday at around this time, I was like talking about having 256 subscribers, which is the same number of subscribers as I have gigabytes of storage in my iPhone and my iPad. And now we are at 336. This is insane. It's not too long, and we'll have added 100 people in a little more over 24 hours, which for a channel of my size is just astronomical growth. Like, I hope it keeps going, but obviously I'm not taking it for granted. Now it's been like 3 days of it happening this way. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope some of my rants were justified. I think me kissing up to Chris and Jordan in the PetaPixel video was justified. So you can take some issue with that, but I think those guys are awesome in what they do. Yeah, this is basically this video. It's been a long one, but I'm very grateful we got through it. Otherwise, I will let you know as always on Twitter, and you can see obviously on here on YouTube when a new video is coming. Please click the notification bell so you will be actually notified. If you're somebody who hasn't yet subscribed, please consider subscribing, liking, following me on Twitter, or supporting me directly on Patreon. You can find the description to the last two things in my channel description. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Without further ado, without further holding you up, this is Mark Tech tuning out.